If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 101, Chapter 98. Scott glared at the silent forest around them with golden eyes as his instincts rang even louder that he was definitely being watched and focused on. "Come out. I know you're there," he called out. Maybe not calling them out is the wisest choice? "We don't know who is out there and it's just you and old buddy Stiles here, you know." Scott ignored Stiles' words and fully transformed with bared claws and fangs as he put his full focus on the forest before them, pushing his senses to TI's edge to locate who was stalking them. It took a few seconds, but he was finally able to pick up a faint presence behind one of the trees a few meters away from them. Before he could call out to whoever was hiding, the presence became more pronounced as their stalker finally revealed themselves. "You? Me?" He eyed Tristan with extreme caution as his mind already came up with a number of scenarios while Tristan would be stalking them, and most of them were not for good reasons. Stiles noticed his caution and his thoughts were already on how they were going to escape Tristan if this was as bad as it looked. His heart skipped a beat further when he thought of Lydia and the fact that Malia was probably at her house while Tristan was here. "We are fucked. What are you doing here stalking me, Tristan?" Scott didn't undo his transformation as he knew fully well that he'd need it if they ended up fighting. On the other hand, Tristan's face was in its usual unexpressive visage as he paid no importance to how warily they regarded him. "Do you have any idea where Derek might be?" He didn't have any hope for an answer, but he still asked. Scott was Derek's beta for all intent and purpose, so if anyone might have an inkling where he'd be, then it was Scott. "Why are you looking for Derek?" Scott didn't put his guard down and replied with a question of his own. For all he knows, either it was Tristan who killed Jackson and Matt, or it was Derek. And his guts told him it was the person in front of him who did it. "You can forget your hostility because I don't care for it, I only want to find Derek," he said and turned around to leave the dumbfounded duo behind him. "Wait." He stopped and turned to Stiles, who had called out to him. "What is happening to Lydia? I know you know what's going on with her. Is she?" Tristan cut him off with a clear response that showed he couldn't care more what was happening to Lydia. "She's a Banshee. Probably undergoing a metamorphosis or the Banshee equivalent. And no, I don't want to kill her." He left out the part where he would kill her if she tried coming for his life or Malia's. "Wait, you still didn't say why you were looking for Derek." Scott shouted, but Tristan didn't say anything else and just disappeared into the forest, leaving the two of them to themselves. "Come on, let's go to Lydia's place to see if she's alright before you go out looking for Derek again." Stiles pulled Scott towards his jeep and kicked it into ignition and drove towards Lydia's house. "I wonder why he was looking for Derek," Scott mused, but Stiles snorted. "What else? Maybe it's time for their weekly meeting where they decide who to kill next," he said with conviction, causing Scott to roll his eyes at what he perceived as Stiles exaggerating something simple. "Come on. You can't say I'm entirely wrong with that. You keep forgetting they killed 2 of our classmates last week." Stiles reminded him in a serious tone, and though he understood, Scott wasn't entirely convinced. "But they were responsible for killing all those people last month. It doesn't make it right, Scott." "You know what, let's just leave it there for another time," Stiles suggested, and they both silently agreed. "I was kinda joking about Derek always being caught, but it seems like it wasn't that much of a joke," Tristan said after retrieving his car from where he parked it and drove away. He shook his head and left it like that since this was out of his power. If Derek was already caught, and he was sure Derek was, this time there was nothing he could do. The young alpha was on his own this time around. Besides the fact that there was no reason for him to risk his and Malia's safety, and the safety of his pack in extension, to save Derek, the few instances of cooperation they had didn't make them life or death allies. He was still a bit cautious of what the hunters might come up with to fight him. They already had one of his weaknesses, but what if they had another? He wasn't about to find out if he could help it. Hopefully this time he can make it out from anywhere they have him chained up. He sighed tiredly and drove towards his home to get started on their dinner and clean up where they messed up yesterday, because he knew that neither Brett, Laurie, nor Tierney will clean the house before they leave. The Martins' house. Just like the day before, the 2 girls promptly showed up to Lydia's house and headed straight for her room after her mother let them in. Malia closed the door behind them while Allison dug into her bag and brought out some of the papers she took home from Lydia's room yesterday. They were all arranged in an order of progression, at least the way she interpreted the drawn events. "What's all that?" Malia asked Allison, who was bringing out a smaller stack of papers from her bag. Well, I did some research yesterday on supernatural creatures connected with death and things related to it. I also browsed through some of my family's archives and I think I found something interesting. She's a Banshee. Malia said. Allison looked between the small pile of printed research and Malia and visibly had to force down the scream that she really wanted to let out. She looked aggrieved at Malia and spoke in a defeated tone. And you couldn't tell me that so I wouldn't have to waste hours coming up with conjectures. Honestly, I forgot. Malia said with a shrug and pointed at the two piles of papers. So, did you find out anything else other than what she is? Allison showed no reaction to the sarcastic comment and explained what she found. Banshees are believed to be able to see when someone's death is approaching and they scream to signify that, so with that I started arranging all the pictures, at least the ones that made sense, and a few events came up. She took out a few sheets and arranged them for Malia to see. The alpha, some werewolf that was supposedly cut in half. She ignored Malia's snort, knowing fully well which party did that. I think this is Mr. LaHaye, a mechanic crushed to death by a car, a few other guys, and then we have Jackson and Matt, along with the hunters who died that day. So? These are all things I could come up with. Right, but what I found was that there are some clues as to who or where the next death will be. Like this for example. She pointed at the picture of Alpha Peter and on the scribblings around it, there was a background drawing of a dead wolf, the Omega. She was about to continue but was interrupted by someone knocking the door and then trying to push it open. Scott, kick the door in. Why? People are inside. Allison looked confusedly at Malia, who rolled her eyes and stood up to open the door. Can I help you guys with something? No, I mean yes. Me, help me out here, man. Stiles couldn't get out an intelligible response and pushed Scott forward. We came to visit Lydia. Mrs. Martin let us in. He said with a wry smile as Malia squinted her eyes at them before letting them in. Allison had wanted to say something and hide the drawings, but Malia beat her to it. Don't worry, they already know. And Scotty over here is a werewolf. She explained. Allison looked shocked to an extent while the other two had pale faces as if Malia just gave them a death sentence, which in a way she did. Scott looked at Allison awkwardly while Allison looked at him warily. The atmosphere in the small room became too uncomfortable for Malia with the prolonged silence as everybody was staring at the other. Can you guys cut it out? I'm already irritated with being dragged here. Don't make me commit a murder too. She said and took the chair at Lydia's table while motioning her hands for Allison to continue. Chapter 102, Chapter 99. Is Lydia okay? Asked a concerned Stiles as he stood on the other side of Lydia's bed. Her mom said she woke up yesterday and managed to eat something before sleeping again. She's doing a lot better than she was yesterday, so she might be fine in a few days. Allison answered truthfully after thinking for a second. She had every right to be cautious of werewolves because unlike Tristan and Malia, who she knew before she became a hunter and forced herself to trust despite everything, the hunter part of her made wary of everyone else, the two in front of her included. A doctor came to check up on her yesterday and said she was just energy deficient, which is why she falls asleep shortly after waking up. Stiles nodded as relief washed over him as he heard that she was going to be all right. Unlike the guarded presence both Allison and Scott had, Stiles only had his focus on Lydia. What is she? She's not a werewolf, that's for sure. He asked after getting his bearings together and finally joined the conversation. She's not. She's a Banshee, Malia said with amusement, waving her fingers as if imitating a ghost. Malia. Allison called out to her, not comfortable with the way Malia seemed nonchalant, but the miss just gave her a patented shrug. Them knowing that doesn't change anything. What are they going to do with it? Allison wanted to say that they might want to exploit a defenseless and ignorant Lydia, but chose not to say it, not after seeing how concerned Stiles was. Any who paid the slightest attention to him in school could plainly see how hard he crushed on Lydia. Scott hastily made their intentions clear after Malia said that, saying how worried they were about her. Don't also forget stopping them in case they want to kill her. Stiles added. The room fell silent again at Stiles' utterance while Scott looked at him incredulously, wondering whose side his best friend was on. Why would I want to kill my friend? Rather than me, I would say Scott is more likely to kill her based on what he is. No offense, Malia. Allison shot back. None taken. Stiles bit back not a second later while pointing at Malia. Scott hasn't killed anyone, unlike your best friend over there. While Allison was stomped for words, the guilty party couldn't care less about the truthful accusation. Good, Now can we get over this? Ginger here can predict when someone is about to die, and the only person we know who is on the rooster is Allison's dear old grandpa. Let's work in that direction. That brought Allison back to focus while also taking Stiles and Scott by surprise, with the former curiously asking, "How does he die?" Allison looked over at Malia and got a nod from her, prompting her to bring out the sheet depicting her grandfather's death. "I don't know about you guys, but it looks as if he had his throat ripped out. Because that's exactly what it is. In other words, a werewolf did it. That's the insinuation." She started and continued with a frown. "But that alone tells us next to nothing. It could be done by any werewolf like Scott here, or either from Derek and his pack members." Scott and Stiles looked at each other with their eyes having an entire dialogue in an instant, something the sole were coyote in the room caught. "It looks like you guys know something. Mind sharing it? I've been looking for Derek and trying to reach him since yesterday, but there's no response. He's not in any of his apartments either," Scott said. Something like this easily caught Allison's attention, more so when Malia said Tristan might probably be looking for him at the moment. "Yeah, we saw him. He said he was looking for Derek but didn't tell us why," Scott said, proving Malia's assumptions true. "Do you know anything about this, Allison?" Stiles asked, staring at the young hunter who appeared confused by the question. "Me? Yes, you. The Kanama is already dead, meaning the only enemies Derek has is the Argent, and there are the only ones strong enough to force him into hiding, or outright catch him," Stiles supplemented. Realization hit Allison, but no matter how she recalled, other than that awkward dinner where she was sure her dad had some heated words with her grandfather, nothing else of note came to mind. "Is there a possibility that he might be caught but you are unaware of it?" This time it was Malia who asked, to which Malia nodded. She wasn't told a lot of things after all. "Derek killed my aunt, why should I care about what happens to him?" "Because unlike your aunt, Derek's is justified. He didn't burn down a whole house with your family trapped inside. Like it or not, your family created the impetus for this whole mess." Stiles never for once thought that not only would he take Derek's side, but also defend him against a hunter. Even Scott was surprised by Stiles' serious rebuttal, but he didn't say anything and kept quiet. If there was one thing that hurt Allison to this day, it was that accusation. The truth of Kate's vile actions disillusioned her so much that she held doubt when it came to the Argents and the family code. She swallowed whatever question she wanted to ask this time and turned to Malia. "Do you have anything to add?" Malia shook her head. "I'll see if I can find out where Derek and his pack are being held, if they are not already dead." Just as Allison said that, the sound of clothes ruffling attracted their attention to Lydia, who was stirring awake. Lydia sat up from her sleeping position and saw 4 stunned faces staring back at her before her ears rang as 2 people screamed her name. "Lydia! Lydia, you are awake!" Stiles awkwardly stopped himself from rushing to the still sleepy Lydia as Allison beat him to it. "Lydia, it's me, Allison. Are you all right?" Clarity finally came to Lydia's eyes as she understood where she was and remembered who the faces in front of her were. Tears pooled out of her eyes and she pulled Allison into a tight hug, as tight as her weakened muscles could hold. "The voices. I kept hearing voices. I heard their voices. I heard Jackson's voice," she said between sobs while clinging onto Allison with everything she had. "Lydia. Please, please. I'm not crazy, I heard the voices. Please believe me, there were voices calling my name. I'm not crazy." She completely broke down while begging someone to believe her words. Her mind was tethering on the verge of completely breaking down because she could no longer distinguish between if they were real or not, so she desperately sought out anyone that could convince her that she was telling the truth. A severe trauma. Seeing Lydia, who she always pictured as strong and prideful, breaking down like this in tears and hearing her desperate pleas, Allison tightly hugged her back and comforted her with words Lydia definitely needed to hear at this moment. "I believe you, Lydia. You are not going crazy, Lydia. There were voices before but now they are gone. Don't worry, you are okay now." Lydia burst into another series of apology and pleading, and Allison supported her all through the way until she finally cried her eyes out and fell asleep once again. Her mother had burst into the room halfway through Lydia's cries and comforted her daughter along with Allison until she fell asleep. "Thank you. I'm very grateful for your presence and supporting Lydia through all this." She thanked them at the door after they decided to go home after waiting for Lydia to wake up again. Thankfully the girl woke up again and Allison and Malia helped feed her while her mother bathed. "What is going to happen to her?" Is there a way she can control this, or will she be comatose every time she sees a vision of someone dying? Stiles was panicky, and for good reasons too. Unfortunately, he received no concrete answers from neither Malia nor Allison. They too were just as ignorant as he was in concern to Lydia. He and Scott got inside his jeep and he drove off, feeling downcast by the whole thing. "Do you want me to give you a ride home?" Allison asked, to which Malia agreed, and so she drove off to Malia's, which wasn't that far from Lydia's house. "You guys sure took your time." They heard Tristan's voice from the kitchen as soon as they closed the front door. They saw him making macaroni and cheese, so they helped him while Malia recounted what happened at the Martins. "Glad she woke up, honestly. I know Ms. Morrill would have been a pain if she hadn't," he said lightly as he took a sip from a cup filled with blood as they sat in the living room eating. He made an offhand notice that Allison only showed slight discomfort before quickly getting used to it. "Are you sure you can find out if your family has Derek behind bars without making them a little suspicious?" "Maybe. Hopefully not, because it will be a lot worse for me if they find out," Allison said, not sounding that confident in her own words. "Just don't push yourself too much because you want to try to prove something or be useful." Tristan's words stunned Allison for a moment before she gave one of her killer smiles that they knew her for. "Thanks for worrying about me," she said sincerely. "Of course I will. You are just as much trouble as you are worth," he said lightly as they ate, which caused Allison's smile to stretch further. "Damn, I don't think I've ever seen Tristan flirt with someone before. And she's blushing mad." Malia. Chapter 103, Chapter 100. School slowly went back to normal and even some new teachers came in since some quit or were transferred out. Practice started once again and the atmosphere around the school was back to normal, at least until another person died. Allison was yet to find out where Derek was being kept, and even when she tried asking about it in a roundabout way, all they said was that it had been taken care of and nothing else. But that gave her the clue that her parents, specifically her father and grandfather, had Derek chained up or dead. She still felt conflicted about trying to free Derek, wondering if freeing him would lead to her grandfather's death. Even if he was harsh and unfeeling sometimes, he still apologized to her and doted on her a lot. There was a lot she was ignorant about, and ironically, she was learning more about the supernatural world from Tristan and Malia more than she was from her family. Other than training her and giving her weird surprise survival tests, they kept mum on every other thing. On the other hand, Tristan and Malia had nothing to do except living their normal lives as everything went back to normal. Other than trying out the extension of his abilities, he had nothing else to do, so he just lazed around with Malia and gave in to her wishes and whims. At least the ones that he felt weren't dangerous or involved killing or maiming someone. The sunset saw them sitting on top of a rock at the edge of a cliff that oversaw all of Beacon County. The fading golden glow from the setting sun and the different lights from the town below somehow looked mesmerizing as the lights below got brighter as the sun went down. "Seeing this somehow brings back old memories, you know." Malia's voice filled with nostalgia broke the peaceful silence as the sun hid behind the clouds. "Which one?" "When we first met," she said. Though she had been an animal then, growing up Satomi had helped her face her trauma of the accident. Some of the memories that came to her were of the times she first met Tristan. In a way, none of them had a past when they met. Just two wandering souls who had nothing to call their own, not even their sense of self, yet they gravitated towards each other and became stuck together. Unlike Malia, whose memories were flashes and impressions, Tristan remembered every second of it. Those were his first meaningful memories. "How so?" he asked as he flicked off the leaf that landed on Malia's head. She shrugged and replied, "I have no idea. The view just made me remember those times." She let out a pearl of happy laughs as the memories came back. "Then you were the stubborn one, because I remember dragging you back to our cave whenever you tried walking off on your own." Tristan smiled a little because he knew that to be true. He didn't understand a lot of things, and with a non-existent sense of danger, Malia was the one who looked after him as a coyote, even resorting to injuring him if he tried to leave the cave on his own. "I guess those were simpler times," he said, but Malia shook her head, not sharing the same sentiment. "You could have died if you had stayed longer with me. You had no idea what to eat, and I wasn't of any help either. I doubt you would have survived the month, not to mention winter." That was a thought that scared Malia more than anything. If not for Tristan leaving the cave that day after the boy and coyote fought and she had followed soon after, Satomi wouldn't have found them and she probably would still be trapped in a coyote's body. Tristan hugged her tighter and tested his chin on her head and spoke softly for her to hear. "We made it out all right, that's all that matters. I didn't die and you were freed." He whispered and rocked her slowly. Nothing other than that matters. She nodded softly and enjoyed herself as Tristan rocked her. It was a source of joy to her that Tristan would only show certain sides of him to her. Coyotes were extremely territorial, and for Malia that territory was Tristan. Tristan on the other hand was no different. She was like a drug to him that he could do nothing but get willingly addicted to, and now he was heavily dependent on her. Satomi once called them flawed creatures so lonely that they needed the presence of the other for their continual survival. Tristan. It's just us, right? Me and you, and no one else. Yes. Tristan felt her grip on his hands wrapping over her waist tighten for a moment. What of Boyd? He chuckled lightly but answered her nonetheless. You know he's just a friend. She hummed and asked again. And Allison? He understood why she asked this in such a roundabout way. Due to their unhealthy dependence on each other, he could see why she'd feel somewhat wary and all. She showed the same reaction to Brett and the others whenever they tried getting too close to Tristan after Satomi brought them to the pack. It took a lot of patience and time for her to understand that nobody was talking Tristan away from her. She's our friend, Malia. I think she might have some kind of crush or attraction to me, but you know her better than me that she would never act on those. Tristan said calmly. He was a vampire and he could sense someone's emotions to a certain extent. He paid no attention to it because it was nothing more than a budding crush that had always been there a little after they became friends. Malia let out a tired sigh and looked at the almost dark sky. I know, Trist. She's my best friend, and being an Argent doesn't help either. I'd hate to see a day where we have to fight her. Despite her blunt exterior and the nonchalant behavior she showed everybody, Malia was fierce when she got attached. You worry too much, you know. He said in exasperation. And you don't worry as much. She bit back. She was about to say something else, but Tristan violently shook her and nudged her with his chin. Don't think too much. I heard Laurie say it causes wrinkles to form. Malia snorted as he said that, but she said nothing more. She calmed down soon after and went back to enjoying Tristan slowly rocking her. You know I love you too much to let anything bad happen to you, right? His words were like a silent murmur, but to her it was like he said it loud enough for her to hear every syllable. You don't say that a lot. She whispered as darkness finally fell over them. Tristan only chuckled and she joined him because she knew just why. It's because I don't need to say it for you to know. Malia closed her eyes and wholly cherished another stolen moment with Tristan. They remained sitting on top of the rock for the next hour with Tristan slowly rocking Malia, who was happily content in his embrace, before they decided to leave. They took their time walking home, well, only Tristan walked since he carried Malia on his back, and hummed the tune of one of their favorite songs as they went. Right now, there was nothing else apart from them. No Derek, no killings, no Argents, just them alone in this tiny moment. Everything else could come later. Lydia Martin POV. If she were to describe how she's been feeling of recent, she would say that she felt like she just escaped from hell. With the support of her mother and her friends, something she still surprisingly had, she had been able to retain a semblance of normalcy, but she alone knew how fragile this normalcy was. A single relapse was all it would take to plunge her straight back to that hell of voices. She could remember their voices, and no matter how it might sound, she knew what she heard was real. Jackson. The dying voice of her ex-boyfriend was something she could ever forget, and though they cleared her room of all the pictures her mom said she had drawn during her relapse, she still remembered glimpses and certain memories that stuck to her head and refused to leave. Kanema. Alpha. BLOODBORN. She muttered as she gazed at her own reflection on the mirror. Who knows, maybe something might run out of it and prove that she really is not going crazy. Sometimes she has problems sleeping because she finds herself waking up in the middle of the night to something like a scream, but she couldn't tell what it was, since only the silence of her room comforted her every time she opened her eyes in the middle of the night. She closed her eyes and drifted off to sleep in a few minutes, hoping she wouldn't wake up in the middle of night again. They are going to die. Chapter 104, Chapter 101. The next day, two girls breathed out in relief when they heard that one of their substitute teachers, Victoria Argent, was stepping down after the school finally managed to hire a new one. Those two girls were naturally Allison and Malia. While the former was glad that her mom could no longer monitor her in school, the latter was just glad that there was one less Argent around. After their first period, which was a pop quiz, one which Lydia used to announce her return by answering a lot of the questions asked, she and Allison escorted Malia to retrieve a book from her locker for the next class. She tried ignoring the presence of the new edition but couldn't find it in herself to remain silent after picking up her book. Can you tell me why you are following me? Malia stared at Lydia, who stood next to a wryly smiling Allison. I'm following Allison, not you. Lydia smugly retorted, but Malia kept on staring at her until Lydia stomped her foot and gave in with a huff. What? I just realized that I don't have that many friends. Good friends. That's no one's fault except yours. Heck, I make better judgments than you. Malia snorted. Lydia gave her a doubtful eye raise but refrained from poking that particular spot. Turns out someone visited me and told everyone I'm going crazy and no one wants to hang out with me. Again, not our fault. Malia said, but Lydia ignored her and continued. So now I'm the new social outcast, and I don't want to be alone. At this point, Allison was signaling Malia with her eyes to tone down on the aggression, since she could tell just how vulnerable Lydia was based on her words alone. Malia, on the other hand, had no idea of how she should react to Lydia's heartfelt words. In the end, she decided to ignore the weird girl and focus more on her next class. Even during their next class, Lydia not only sat behind her and Allison but also forcefully involved her in her conversation with Allison. If not for Allison silently chiding Malia and telling her to be a bit considerate to Lydia given what she just went through, Malia would have blown a gasket in the middle of class and probably killed someone too. Fortunately for everyone around her, Malia knew how to control her emotions in stressful situations such as these, so the entire class remained oblivious until it was time for lunch break. Keep a seat for me in the cafeteria. I need to visit the guidance counselor's office to talk to Ms. Morrill. Catch you in a few minutes. Lydia said and left them for the guidance counselor, which made Malia sigh in relief. You really don't have to be like that, Malia. You, out of the both of us, should know better how mentally unstable she is right now. Allison reprimanded. Even if Malia had some sort of grudge against Lydia, it did not excuse how demeaning she was to Lydia, who was currently putting on a fake confident expression and trying to hang on to her last thread of sanity. Malia could hear how Lydia's heartbeat would rise at the smallest thing, and part of her told her that the reason she was extra chatty was that she was afraid. Afraid that no one can hear her and she will be once again trapped with the wailing voices. Fine. I can try. Malia reluctantly agreed. It also helped that she could somehow relate to what Lydia might be going through. No promises if she continues annoying me. Fair, I guess. Was all Allison could say as she rolled her eyes at Malia's pettiness. She changed the subject to something else as they neared the cafeteria. I think I found something that might lead us to Derek. She started. I noticed my grandfather has been leaving the house a lot more than my dad of recent, and every time he comes back it's like there's this disagreement between him and my Ada that becomes apparent. So you want us to trail your grandfather when he leaves your house and see if he will lead us to Derek? Allison nodded. I mean, yeah. I can't do it myself, but I can put something in his tires to give you guys a scent trail or something. Malia thought it over, but the idea of trailing after Gerard didn't sound interesting to her in any way. Or you could just tag the car and have Scott and Stiles track it. They are the ones who want to find Derek after all. She proposed. Since Scott could be said to be a part of Derek's pack, even if unwilling, it made more sense for him to find his alpha. You said he's a member of Derek's pack, right? Then I can't really trust him if that's the case. Malia was confused as Allison denied her proposal. What does trusting him have to do with anything? She asked, perplexed. You forget my grandfather might die because of this, right? Derek will definitely hold a grudge, especially if any of his betas are dead. The entire thing left her utterly confused. How can someone accurately predict someone's death? Was it even a prediction or a foretelling that can't be changed? Whatever it was, she couldn't tell it correctly, so she just accepted it as she saw it. But even with that came another set of questions. Will her intervening cause her father's death, or will Scott find Derek regardless of her help and cause the death of her grandfather? She had absolutely no idea, and worst of all, it felt as if she was the only one grasping at straws. She looked at Malia feeling conflicted but understood why they couldn't care less if her grandfather died. So you want us to do the tracking and hopefully prevent Derek from ripping out Gerard's throat if it eventually comes to it? She nodded and became hopeful as she heard Malia sigh tiredly. You will have to convince Tristan to want to do that. Malia looked at Allison and explained. Let's say we do, hippo. Hypothetically. Yes, hypothetically. Let's say hypothetically we agree to follow Gerard, chances that our covers will be blown are high, which will then put us in your family's scope. If they decide to come after us, and they will, it will end up dragging our entire pack into it. And I can assure you that that's an outcome no one wants to see. As for Derek, it had nothing to do with them. She and Tristan were just two betas. Trying to think that they could tell an alpha like Derek what to do is the height or arrogance. Allison winced as she heard that and decided to just get something to eat before thinking through this again. Come on then, let's go get something to eat. She drawled out and pulled Malia along. The lacrosse squad stood in their locker room as they listened to what coach had to say. In dark of the death of our co-captain, Jackson, I want to appoint another person who will assist McCall as fellow co-captain. The choices are between Danny and Hayes. Hands up if you want Danny as co-captain. Coach noted the number of hands that voted for Danny and wrote it down. Now hands up for those who want Hayes as co-captain. He noted down the number and turned to the two popular players and with a small smirk on his face. Congratulations, Hayes. You are now a co-captain. You just achieved something worse than getting a girlfriend responsibility. He laughed as he finished his sentence. Coach, why can't we just have Danny and Hayes as co-captains? Someone asked out loud, which elicited a few laughs, but Coach remained unperturbed. McCall's been a part of the team the same time that Danny and most of you joined. Also he along with Hayes are our best scorers at the moment. No offense, Danny. None taken, Coach. Danny shrugged. He never wanted to be co-captain in the first place. Cool. Now get back to class. Remember we have practice tomorrow morning. Coach said and left them to their devices. Tristan sighed irritably as he shoved his gear inside his locker, inwardly pissed off with Coach's decision on making him co-captain. That face tells me just how excited you are about being chosen as co-captain. Boyd came to his side with a sarcastic comment that increased Tristan's irritation. Don't push it. Tristan warned, but Boyd knew him well enough to know when and how far he could push his buttons, and push he did. Oh come on now. Already got an attitude just because you got promoted, hey. The view from the top must be pretty nice. He joked. Faced with Tristan's plain stare, he swiftly took a step back and showed his hands in surrender. We cool. Tristan slammed his locker shut before turning back to Boyd. Cool. Chapter 105, Chapter 102. Gerard dropped the bloody metal pipe on the ground and regarded the brutally beaten and strung up Derek with a huge scowl on his face. I've run out of my patience for this little game of ours, Derek. He held up Derek's bloody face roughly and said. Make your choice now. Give me what I want and I'll let both of your betas go free in whatever state they are currently in. The thing that frustrated him the most was that no matter how he tortured him or made him watch his betas being tortured, Derek refused to shift form, much to his chagrin. The most he had gotten from him was his eyes flickering red for a brief moment, but that was it. Neither his fangs or claws grew a centimeter despite the bubbling rage Derek felt. So what will it be, Derek? Are you willing to throw away the only chance of survival your innocent betas will get from me? Or will you still stubbornly hang on to your foolish pride and watch them die? Derek struggled to open his eyes halfway through the burning pain he felt, and looking at Gerard's eyes told him that Gerard was no longer torturing him out of spite. If he refuses here, Gerard will kill his beta in the next minute. Why, Ord. Gerard scoffed at that. You don't have any right to bargain as you are, Derek. But I will give it to you this time, you have my word that your betas will be spared. You on the other hand are a whole different story. He sneered. Derek closed his eyes at that, knowing fully well that whether or not he agreed, Gerard could do anything he wanted to his betas without any restrictions holding him back. Summoning his last wisp of strength, Derek took on what could very well be his last time shape-shifting. He stared at Gerard with his face all scrunched up and hairy in his werewolf form. He could practically smell the greed oozing from the man at the prospect of him acquiring his long-sought power. Yes. That's it. Just a simple bite. You'd find that there was no need for you to be this difficult for this long. Gerard was inwardly salivating as he tenderly brought his old weary hands closer to Derek's maw, already anticipating the power that would flow through his veins the very next minute. Unfortunately, fate had another thing planned out for Gerard Argent. Just as the old patriarch was about to step into a higher height of evolution, a slight tremor vibrated through the iron pipes in the building. And before he could question what the hell that was, the unmistakable howl of a wolf resounded through the entire building, making his blood run cold because he knew just what that could do, werewolves in particular. As if answering his fears, he whipped his head back to Derek, who looked stunned for a moment, questioning his ears, and as soon as he understood the meaning of the howl, his eyes flickered to Gerard staring at him with a threatening look on his face. Don't you dare! He shouted, albeit a moment too late, as Derek undid his transformation instantly before he could force his hand into his mouth. Derek faced him with a weary smirk that looked extra sinister with his bloodied mouth and swollen face. "You'll have to try harder, Gerard," he said. "Argh!" Gerard shouted in frustration and hit Derek across the face with the metal pipe to vent out his turbulent emotions. "I'll be back for you," he said, and left a half-dead Derek as he angrily made his way towards the source of the disturbance with murder in his mind. Degree. Tristan Hayes POV. Tristan will be the first person to say that he sometimes regrets making some emotional connections with people outside of his pack. After being irritated by his new position as co-captain of the lacrosse team, when he had expected to relax by resting his troubled head on Malia's lap, he instead had been met with Allison asking him to help Scott in rescuing Derek. She seemed to be sure, scared even, that something would happen if Scott manages to find Derek that will spur Derek into killing Gerard. His instant response had been a resounding no, and while it hurt her, she still begged him, but this time as a favor. And this was where it got complicated. Malia joined in, well, not outright, but she worded it in a way as if convincing him that it wouldn't matter anyway if they went or not. But unfortunately for her, this was one of those rare times when he rejected her wishes. The three of them remained staring at each other, Allison and Tristan not relenting in theirs, while Malia winced when she noticed she was being the odd one out. Even though he knew she would always side with him whenever the situation calls for it, he couldn't help but wonder if Malia really cared this much for Allison. Can she bear to raise her fangs against her if their safety depended on it? Probably, but he doubted she could do it without hesitation. Stuck in an impasse, he referred to the one person that would make the best decision in his stead. He called Satomi and told her everything, including how Allison hid a tracker in Gerard's car after school and was currently tracking him to where Derek was probably held up. "I couldn't do anything when Talia's family were burned alive, despite me calling myself her friend," Satomi said. "I had no idea when her daughter, Laura, came back to Beacon Hills, nor when she died. I left Peter to carry out his revenge because I believed it was rightful of him, but whereas Derek chose the path of least bloodshed by only killing the person responsible, Kate Argent, Peter wanted an equal blood payment. And he died due to it." Though she spoke over a phone call, Tristan and Malia easily noticed how heavy she felt as she spoke those words. Being old doesn't always make the decisions that one makes the right one. It only helps in using experience to foresee consequences. And when it finally comes to it, I can't find it in me to idly stand to the side and watch as Talia's last blood die due to an old blood debt. Follow the young Allison and help rescue Derek, Tristan. Even though he had expected it from the start due to her initial words, Tristan still sighed as he agreed to her decision. He wanted to cut the call there, but Satomi's last words entered his ears as he disabled the loudspeaker. "Send me the location, Tristan. I'll be making my way over as soon as possible." Those words alone caused goosebumps to spread over his body, but he said nothing and ended the call. "Well, you heard her." Allison beamed as she saw that he no longer hesitated. "Send the location to McCall. Tell them we'll meet them there in a few minutes." Allison sent over the location of Gerard's car that was still stationary to the duo of Scott and Stiles as she drove Tristan and Malia towards Gerard's location. It took them a few minutes to arrive, and Allison parked her car a healthy distance from where Gerard's was parked. Scott and Stiles were already in hiding waiting for them, keeping watch of the abandoned building in front of them. "Can you feel anything, Tristan?" Malia asked as she saw him sniffing the air, but he shook his head. "Gerard is definitely inside that building, but other than a few people lazing around, I can't pick up on either Derek or his beta's presence. I can't even sense Gerard," he said with a frown. "Maybe there's something like a bunker underneath the building? We have a few of these types of buildings. My family uses them as underground storage." Hearing Allison's explanation, they all nodded at how plausible it sounded and made their way towards it, with Tristan making sure that nobody inside the building saw them as they approached. "How are we going to get to the underground bunker with those hunters keeping watch? There are quite a few of them after all." Malia looked weirdly at Stiles, which confused the boy until he understood what the silence meant. "Oh, you will? Good. I'll wait out here until you guys are done. Blood makes me queasy." His face twitched as a gory mental image played out in his head like a premonition. "Malia, let's go," Tristan simply said and cut himself in the back of his waist, much to their confusion, but he ignored it and stormed the building with Malia, with Allison and McCall following their lead. The bored hunters who were on lookout failed to notice them until it was too late, as the group of vampire, wercoyote, werewolf, and their own heiress attacked them and quickly took them out. The ones who fought Allison and Scott had it better, as the only thing they suffered were some injuries, broken bones, and losing consciousness. while the ones that were targeted by Tristan and Malia weren't so lucky. In a way, it could be said that they had it best because they won't be feeling any more pain after this, forever. Chapter 106, Chapter 103. After quickly taking care of hunters stationed in the building, along with a pale Stiles who looked as if he was one bloody comment away from throwing up, the group of diverse teenagers made their way to the basement of the building. The basement looked deceptively similar to every other abandoned building's basement, but Tristan's next word told them that they were in the right place. Gerard's scent is getting a little thicker. Something is definitely under this building. Even Scott and Malia agreed with his comment as they could clearly pick up on Gerard's scent. He's right. There must be something here to take us below. Stiles rolled his eyes sarcastically and pointed at a bug-infested shelf at the side. And let me guess, that shelf is a secret mechanism with a door behind it that will take us down to the bunker below. Malia walked up to the shelf and ripped it apart before turning to Stiles, who everyone was now looking at weirdly. Come on now, don't look at me like that. That shelf had to be the obvious and cliché thing in this setting. He rolled his eyes in false exasperation as he tried to hide how smug he felt in that moment. Well, he's not wrong, Tristan said. He aided Malia to pull open the door behind the shelf, which revealed an old elevator that went down. He took a deep inhale and nodded. Gerard is definitely down there, and I can smell a suffocating amount of murderous emotions and tons of blood. Allison looked worried, same as Scott, but for two entirely different reasons. Stiles gulped nervously and asked tentatively. When you say murderous emotions, just how intense are we talking about? The kind that wishes to separate your flesh from your bones while making sure you're still alive to feel every inch of your body being sliced to thin fillets. Stiles shivered in horrific fright at Tristan's words, and that stone-cold expressionless face of his made what he described even more terrifying. He could only grumble to himself and hold back his grievances and followed the group into the elevator as they went down to the source of the murderous emotions. Yab. It's definitely Derek. He silently thought as the grumpy wolf was the only one he knew, apart from the two psycho teens in front of him, who fitted Tristan's description of murder. Malia and Scott winced as they finally perceived the full brunt of blood that permeated the air here. I can't get a good direction with all this blood in the air. Malia scrunched her nose as she tried searching for either Isaac and Eric, or Derek, but she couldn't pick a scent trail. I've found Isaac and Erica, and I don't think they look too good based on what I'm sensing, Tristan informed. He didn't let anyone ask him any questions and simply led them as he tracked the room the two captured, and definitely tortured, betas were kept. Under his special sensitivity to blood, he had no problem with finding them despite how saturated with blood the air was. He would have been lost just like Malia and Scott if he tried finding them with just his nose. Even with how cold he looked, he along with the others, widened their eyes in surprise as they saw the utterly battered bodies of Isaac and Erica in chains, weakly dangling from a thick metal block that kept them suspended a few centimeters from the ground. Allison covered her mouth as she gasped in shock and disbelief of the horrible sight in front of her. Malia was mostly in disbelief, but there was also a healthy dose of shock mixed in. Stiles and Scott mirrored Allison's reaction in every way, and while Tristan was just as shocked as them, he quickly regained his composure, at least a semblance of it, and hurriedly went to help them. Malia. His voice broke them from their stunned stupor while Malia came over to loosen the chains holding them up. What is this? Allison's voice shook, but no one had the luxury to answer her question as they all were helping in trying to bring them down. Seeing they were wasting time they couldn't afford, Tristan used his claws and cut the chains holding Isaac, which prompted Malia to do the same to Erica. They are barely alive, Trist. What do we do? Malia asked as she noticed that they were barely getting sufficient air into their lungs even after the chains were caught. Tristan's brows furrowed as he thought of a way to help them to at least get their breathing in order. Only after that can they begin healing. Is this what hunters do to any werewolf they catch? Tie them up and torture them to their last breath? Scott asked softly as he looked at Allison. Allison's already pale face was already ghostly white at this point, and she subconsciously shook her head at Scott's question, despite the evidence pointing to the contrary. No, we don't. We only go after werewolves who kill innocent people. Her words were cut off by Tristan's cold voice. But they haven't killed anybody, have they? Even if they have, it would be the hunters who came after them in the first place. She had absolutely nothing to say to refute Tristan's words. Tristan paid no attention to her and kept his focus on Isaac, who looked more battered up than Erica. Malia, let's try taking a bit of their pain. Just enough to kickstart their healing. The intense pain they are feeling right now is why they can't even take a full breath. The ability to take away someone's pain, even heal them when it's advanced enough, was something that was exclusive to only a few supernatural species, with the most being were creatures. Luckily it was something Tristan could also learn. Not everyone in their pack knew how to do it, some were even unaware of it, but Malia and Tristan along with Brett and Lori were able to make Satomi teach them how to do it after Elias had unknowingly let it slip one time when he was telling them stories of his youth as a werewolf. They didn't delay anymore and concentrated wholly on what they were doing, and the others smartly kept quiet and watched them do whatever it was that they were doing. They however became alarmed when they saw dark veins appearing all over Tristan and Malia's bodies, even letting out pained grunts. They had wanted to stop them but stilled their steps as they saw the chest of the two tortured werewolves visibly going up and down as they took in large breaths. Isaac was the first one to open his eyes and they saw that it was a shining azure blue. His kept taking in deep breaths but looked as if something was stuck in his throat that he reflexively hit the ground with a strong force that his weakened body could not have possessed. While the others were startled by his actions, Erica also jolted awake and when she opened her eyes, they saw that it was still golden but that didn't remain for long. They were astonished to see the golden glow in her eyes receding until it took on the same beautiful shade as Isaac's blue eyes. And then they opened their mouths. None of them expected the loud roaring howl that Isaac and Erica let out for a few seconds before slumping back into unconsciousness, which was when Tristan and Malia stopped taking any more of their pain. The two of them coughed violently as they let the two betas go. The others waited until they had their breathing in order before they asked. "Are they okay, now?" Stiles asked the two of them with concern spread across his face. "We took their pain, a sufficient amount of it that would let their body start healing itself. They still have a long way to go before complete recovery," Tristan explained. Scott's eyes widened in surprise as he had no idea that they could do something like that. "I should probably ask them to teach me how to do that after we get out of here. While it's all good that they are not going to take their last breath in the next 10 seconds, we should hurry up and look for Derek because I'm positive that that shout of theirs echoed throughout this entire place to the building above." Stiles' reminder, though unnecessary because they already knew that, prompted them to hurry up. Being their best tracker, Scott supported Isaac against his body and let Tristan sniff out Derek's trail. Due to being lightheaded from the intense pain he took from Isaac, his senses weren't spread out like they had been and when he caught the scent of somebody entering the room, it was already too late. "I don't think anyone will be leaving until I say so." They all looked shocked as they saw Gerard standing behind Allison who jumped in shock. Chapter 107, Chapter 104. They looked warily at Gerard who leveled a gun at them with his usual grandfatherly smile still plastered on his face. "I must say it's quite a surprise seeing all you youngsters here, makes me wonder who planned this terrible attempt at a rescue." He looked at all of them and studied the look on their faces and when he turned to his granddaughter, he couldn't help but be unpleasantly surprised. "You did all this, child, why?" Allison was spooked, even though she tried to hide, as Gerard questioned her. The faint feeling of fear she was subjected to whenever she was in his presence was suddenly multiplied as she faced him. "Why did you torture them like that?" In the end she managed to squeeze out a question to Gerard and that gave her a bit of confidence. "I wouldn't move if I were you, Tristan. We wouldn't want to risk someone mistakenly dying during a civil conversation now, would we?" Though he kept his tone light-hearted, everyone could feel the blatant threat those words carried, and Tristan who had been readying himself for a pounce stopped. Sensing no other movements, Gerard smiled and returned back to Allison's question. "I thought I told you that we can't show any ounce of mercy to our enemies." This time around, Allison's voice was steady as she replied her grandfather. "But are they our enemies? They never killed any innocent person nor did they attack us for no reason. The code says." "Do not speak to me about the code, child. I know what the code says and when it comes to this family, I alone decide when it's relevant to follow the code or not," Gerard shouted, his smile completely gone from his face. Allison shook from his sudden outburst and the veil over her eyes started having little visible tears from which she could finally see the supernatural world for what it really is without any filters. But the both of them did nothing other than being Derek's betas. She stated. Gerard sneered at those words. "It doesn't matter. Not when they killed my daughter by ripping her throat open. My little girl died to their filthy hands, and for that they will all pay. That also now includes your friends here, Allison." She already expected him to say something like this from the beginning and given everything he's said, she knew couldn't talk him out of it. She took a glance at friends she came with. While she could see panic and fear in Scott and Stiles' eyes, Tristan and Malia on the other hand were looking at both her and Gerard with a look she had come to know them for. They regarded the both of them with the same blank unfeeling face she's seen them out on almost every day since the very first day she met them. But unlike before when she couldn't tell what they were thinking when they looked like that, she could understand the reason behind it in this situation. As the future head of this family, it is your duty to show me how competent and resolute you are. Gerard started. Take this as your final test in being a hunter, kill one of them. He then handed her a gun. A lump formed in her throat as her deepest fears were finally actualized. A scenario where she had to choose between the two. Family and duty or friends and morality. It might have been a simple choice for anyone else, but Allison's life didn't exactly fit with everyone else. She took another glance hoping to see something, but all she met was the same unfeeling cold eyes of her best friends. Are you hesitating, Allison? Take the gun and show me you are ready. Her hand stretched out on its own under Gerard's assertiveness, and she only realized what she was doing when her hands held the cold metal. Good. Now show me your resolve as the next Argent Matriarch. Pick any one of your choice. Personally, I'd suggest between Tristan and Malia here. He chuckled at his own words. Allison took a deep breath in that brief moment. Everything she knew about her family and had come to know of the supernatural world from Tristan and Malia, played out. Her choice? I will choose my friends and morality, she said as she leveled the gun at her own grandfather, but Gerard completely ignored it. Over your own family and duty? You ungrateful child! He said with anger. I also choose my family and my duty as an Argent, but not when it goes against my morals. Gerard sneered. What do you know about morals? I know that it's the lack of it that made Kate burn down the Hale family and never caring of the innocents she killed. The more she spoke, the more confident she sounded, and the gun became steady in her hands. Was she surprised when Gerard suddenly redirected the muzzle of his gun from her friends to point it at her? Honestly, she doesn't know. Was this the true nature of her family? So hell-bent on killing werewolves regardless of if they were innocent that they would even kill innocents and threaten to kill their own child? It was such a sad thought, and she fervently hoped that her parents were nothing like this, and that they truly loved her. Lower your gun, Allison. Gerard commanded with a calm voice, as if he couldn't stand the disrespect rather than feeling threatened by the gun pointed at him. I won't. Then. Gerard. Lower your gun, you've gone too far. The group looked at the new addition of Allison's father, who had his gun pointed at his own father. Neither Tristan and Malia, nor Scott and Stiles, who were with them, fully understood the progression of the events that were playing out, but they still refrained from moving as Gerard could just point his gun at them. Tristan could tank a few bullets, as long as they don't go through his head, and dodge most of them given the distance between them, but the problem was that Malia was holding Erica up, and if he made any sudden movements, he had no assurance that Gerard wouldn't capitalize on that before he got to him and shoot at Malia, who was basically a prime shooting target. Do you see what you are doing? You are pointing a gun at your own granddaughter. Are you that far gone that you still can't understand the consequences of your actions? Chris' eyes were red with fury as he stared at Gerard, who felt like a total stranger to him at this moment. It wouldn't have come to this if you had let me train her properly. Train her? I think you mean brainwashing her like you did to Kate, don't you? Chris stared at his father with a dark look on his face. Kate deserved the death she got for what she did, I won't deny that. And I will die before I let you make my daughter a repeat of her. The two men had their weapons pointed at each other with totally calm faces and steady hands. You really have fallen so low that you'd even point your weapon at your own children, Gerard. The three Argents turned to look at the source of the new voice, and they saw an elderly Asian woman supporting a limping Derek. Gerard's reaction was the fastest as the moment he realized he was completely outnumbered with the presence of these two, he reached out and grabbed Allison's outstretched hand as she was the closest one to him, and before she could fight back the pull or pull back her hands from his, she found herself in his embrace. However, unlike the normal tender embrace of a grandfather to his grandchild, hers was one where he joined the mouth of a gun to the side of her skull. Satomi. I never thought I'd see you anywhere near me, definitely not like this. He said to Satomi, who looked calm as she held one of Derek's arms over her shoulders. I could say the same thing, but with entirely different sentiments. How pitiful that one of the greatest hunters of the last 100 years has turned rabid, that he threatens to kill his own children. No one could actually tell how she felt from how calm her words sounded. And what has that done for me? I am still dying. Thankfully, and as much as I hate to admit it, I recognize when I'm cornered. Let me go and you won't have to see me kill my own grandchild, because it will hurt me more than anyone else. He said lightly with his normal grandfatherly smile. Chris frowned, and if not for his little girl in his psychopathic father's hands, he would have shot him without hesitation. He glanced at Satomi and saw that she just gave the way for Gerard to pass through with the same unperturbed look on her face. Derek might have wanted nothing more at this moment than to rip open Gerard's body and eat out his heart after seeing the state of his betas, but he trusted Satomi's choices and let her do what she desired without questioning it. Gerard looked between his son and the ancient wolf in front of him while silently gritting his teeth at losing his chance at becoming a werewolf and an alpha at the same time. Slowly making his way past them, he continued like that until he felt he was a good distance away and pushed Allison away. Allison immediately increased the distance between them and ran into her father's embrace, who hugged her tenderly. Regrettably, she was becoming a strong girl, and strong girls don't cry. "Leave him be, Tristan. He is someone else's prey now." Satomi stopped Tristan from chasing after Gerard, knowing he'd bring back the old man's head in moments. She, more than anyone, knew the significance of a blood debt, and until it's fully paid, it'll keep moving down the bloodline until it destroys both the debtor and the collector. Chris looked at Tristan and Malia, and then at Satomi and connected the dots. "I had no idea the betas of the Buddhist pack were this close to me all this while," he said. "It makes no difference if you had known, doesn't it?" she said coolly. Chris let out a chuckle and nodded his head. "You're right. It doesn't." It was a tacit agreement, and Chris wholly agreed. He'd rather not deal with the Buddhist pack if he could help it. Chapter 108, Chapter 105. Those are quite serious wounds. What kind of monster would torture children like this even if they did kill someone? Elias shook his head in sadness as he saw the state both Isaac and Erica were in. Just taking a glance at them made it abundantly clear of the numerous inhumane tortures they were subjected to, but it was only when you feel what is happening inside their bodies that you can finally paint a picture of how intensive the whole experience had been. "I see that the old hunter has finally gone senile. This wasn't done specifically to make them suffer or because he particularly enjoyed it. He just did it because he had the power to. He is too dangerous to be left alive, Satomi," Elias said to Satomi, who was mixing a few exotic herbs she had collected over the years and was grinding them to a paste to help speed up the healing process. "I know that all too well, and if young Derek can't find him before the hunters do, I will step in at that point and ensure that he dies." She paused for a bit and went back to grinding the herbs. Even if she abstained as much as she could from the rest of the and practiced the way of the Buddha to detach her heart from worldly attachments, a wolf was still a wolf at the end of the day. She hated conflicts, abhorred the act of taking a life even more, but the fact remained that she was a wolf first, an alpha at that, and a Buddhist practitioner second. Having the power to stop the senseless killings from continuing further and yet deciding to do nothing is an act of hypocrisy. And why she won't deny that she spent most of her life being a hypocrite, even her hypocrisy had a limit it could not go over. "I don't like this, Satomi. Not when the young ones are embroiled in the thick of it. It reeks of a bad omen," Elias said with a frown which Satomi complimented with a tired sigh of her own. "We can't discern the flow of nature, Elias. Fighting against it is an even more foolish attempt. We simply do the best we can and leave the rest to the universe to judge us on our karma." She took the mixture she just made and moved over to where the two betas were resting and started softly applying it all over their body. Fortunately for them, their body, despite its worst state, has started fighting the wolf's bane in their system. Once it clears, half of the healing would have already been done. The both of them left the room that now smelled of thick herbal medicine and arrived at the living room where Derek, who was almost completely healed up, sat anxiously for the last hour with Tristan and Malia keeping him company as they laid together in one of the longer chairs. Hearing her footsteps, Derek immediately stood up and asked anxiously, "Are they going to be okay?" His mind couldn't rest easy, not when he had yet to know the state of his betas. "They are already recovering, but I have no idea of how okay they might be when they wake up. The mental traumas and scars are still there, so that will be one of the things for you to look out for." Satomi took her time and patiently explained everything that had been done to them while he had watched most of it and was forced to hear everything. Hearing the true extent of how much both underwent, Derek was both half broken and half incensed that the only thing his brain could easily comprehend was that he wanted nothing more than to kill Gerard. Derek sank back into the chair he had been sitting on and clutched his head. "Am I that bad of an alpha that I can't even protect my betas?" Satomi put a hand on his shoulder to stop him from descending into a downward spiral. "It's not because you are a bad alpha, it's just that you are not that experienced. Your actions so far show just how much you care for your pack. Unfortunately, experience isn't so easily gotten in an instant, but instead through the passage of time." Derek digested her words and bowed his head in gratitude to her. "Thank you for everything you've done for me and my pack. I will try my best to pay back this favor." Don't worry about such things now. Take your time and completely heal until you know you are ready to go after Gerard. She gave him her advice, but it was ultimately up to him on how he wanted to do so. Derek went ahead and found a room for him to sleep in and temporarily forget everything that had happened to him over the previous week. With Derek gone, Satomi turned to the two young cubs who were minding their own business and asked, "How do you feel?" She asked with a soft smile on her face while Elias walked out of the room and ruffled Malia's hair as he left them alone, much to the girl's consternation. "Us? I don't see why we shouldn't be fine. We were not the ones who was almost killed by their own grandfather," Tristan said in confusion, not understanding why she asked that when she could tell they were okay. "I'm not asking how you specifically feel," Satomi said, and watched in amusement as the two of them stared at each other in apparent confusion before they turned to look at her. "Can't you just ask what you want to ask in a straightforward manner like normal people do?" Malia complained, but Satomi said nothing and just walked over to them and bent down to reach their reclining height. Seeing her doing that, they immediately wanted to sit up straight, but she stopped them and looked them in the eyes before nodding to herself. "If you can't think of a reason why you shouldn't feel okay, that means there's nothing wrong with you. Just continue taking care of each other like you've always have." Her words confused them a whole bit, but she left it at that and kissed them both on their foreheads before leaving. She gave them a reminder as she left. "Do be good children and keep an ear on those two unfortunate children. They will need their alpha when they wake up." After she left, the young couple stared dumbly at each other, wondering what she had meant earlier with her words. "Gah! Let's forget it. She would have made it clear if it had been something important." Malia's frustration peaked and decided to throw whatever Satomi said to the back of her mind. Tristan silently agreed and did the same as her. Allison Argent POV. Allison sat quietly in her seat as her father drove them home. He had been on the phone with a few people telling them to call him if they find his father. "You don't have anything to say?" she heard her father say after the silence got unbearable for him. Allison sighed and placed her head on the headrest and absent-mindedly stared at the roof of the car. "Grand. Gerard said that the relevance of the code only applies if he decides it should. Is that the same with the other hunters in our family?" Right now her mind was very clear, unlike before, so the question easily flowed out. Chris frowned for a bit but shook his head. "No, it doesn't. The code represents a line we can't cross, and we enforce it not only on supernaturals, but also on hunters who break it." She tilted her head to look at her father. "And it's our job to make sure the others follow the code, which is also why Kate walked freely after what she did, because Gerard was the one who enforced it." Chris ran a hand through his hair and muttered under his breath. "Basically." Hearing her father's admittance, she asked again. A crucial question she needed him to answer. "So not all werewolves are bad? If we only hunt those who prey on innocents, then there are also those who don't, right?" "Allison." Chris' voice went dark and he sent a glare her way. "Just because they haven't killed an innocent person doesn't mean we should associate with them, least of all befriend them." He gave her a pointed stare as he said that, a look she understood. She saw her father's hard stare that warned her to abandon a specific thought he knew she was having. Allison didn't react to it and just continued. "I don't think I will feel much of anything if I were to kill someone now, werewolf or human." Her words alarmed him, but she didn't let him interrupt. "I want to continue my training under you and learn all there is to learn about the Argent family and supernaturals." "And then what?" he asked tentatively. "I will act on the code, and then my conscience. I will hunt those who hunt us and kill those who prey on the innocents." "You're right. The code is a guideline, but it's not the only guideline that can be followed." Chris felt conflicted as he watched his daughter speak, understanding that she had grown up, but he wasn't there to experience it. He didn't know what type of experience influenced her growth, and he wasn't there to guide her through it. It was a painful thing for any parent to experience, especially when it's their only child. "And your friends?" Tristan and Malia. Their stares held together until Allison shrugged nonchalantly. "The same thing. I will hunt them if they hunt me. And if they don't?" Allison put on a thoughtful expression as she mulled over it. At the end of it she just smiled slightly and answered with the conclusion she arrived at. "If they don't? Then there's no need to change it then. Change is inevitable, true, but sometimes it's better if things remain as they are." What it meant for her and her father who listened to her words, the result for it will only show itself later in the future. Chapter 109, Chapter 106. Derek Hale POV. It wasn't much of a surprise that Derek couldn't get a wink of sleep at all throughout the entire night, as flashes of all what he had seen and experienced over the last week came to mind as soon as he closed his eyes. Was it strange to say that he hated Gerard more than he ever did Kate? Even though the latter burned his entire family to death and sawed his sister in half? Derek got up in the middle of the night and went into the adjacent bathroom to wash his face. He looked at his reflection in the mirror, and unlike what he used to see before, a serene picture of the alpha he always dreamed to be, what he now saw was so distorted that there was no way he could prove that the reflection was his. How pitiful. His betas were fighting for their lives, and here he was, worried about what his reflection looked like. Who cares what he now was? If he can't even identify the image, then that just made it all the more irrelevant. He walked out of the room, and due to it being night, the entire house was quiet. Can't sleep. His inner thoughts were broken by Elias' voice that sounded behind him. It's all right, I understand. Elias said, waving in understanding as he saw the look in the scarred alpha's eyes. Join me for a drink. Sure. Derek said, and soon they found themselves sitting on the porch, each with a bottle of beer in their hands. Want to talk about it? Elias asked. It's one of the worst things to happen to any alpha if they lose their identity. Derek chuckled darkly, but the smile couldn't sit straight on his face and soon slipped away. It didn't look that way when it happened to Peter. I'd even say it made him stronger. Doesn't sound all that bad to me from where I'm sitting. Elias shook his head at Derek and let out a satisfying breath as he drank from the cold bottle of beer in his hands. From what I heard, it isn't that Peter Hale lost his identity. Instead, his rage warped his identity and twisted him, and that was reflected by his transformation as an alpha. Elias explained. He might not be an alpha, but he dare say he was more knowledgeable than most. If you as an alpha can't even identify yourself, even a twisted version of you, then how do you expect your betas to do so? It will be like a blind man leading a bunch of clueless children. A growl almost escaped Derek's mouth, and his eyes briefly flashed red, something that Elias noticed. The young Hale took a moment to calm down and finished the bottle and used the empty glass as a lens to view the half-moon hanging up in the sky. The only thing I can think of right now is finding Gerard and using my claws to dig out every single piece of flesh in his body, but I can't now. He set the bottle aside and looked at his hands. I need to make sure that they are fine first before I do anything else. I can't continue to remain selfish, even if it's fully justified. Elias looked at Derek, and though this was the first time he was speaking to Derek Hale, he easily identified the growth the man before him was undergoing. Elias nodded in full support of Derek's words. You're right. Sometimes there are things that are more important than justified revenge. I'm still taking it though. I'm still killing Gerard. He laughed humorously but didn't deny Derek's words. Of course. Sometimes revenge is just as important, dare say I even necessary. Before any of them could continue their conversation, the doors were pushed slightly open and Malia put her head through the ajar. Elias asked as he saw her intrusion. Is there something wrong, dear? Malia shook her head and pointed at Derek. I just came over from checking up on Isaac and Erica and came to tell Grumpy here that they are waking up. Derek didn't need her to say anything else and immediately pushed his way through the door and hurriedly made his way towards them. His hands trembled for a bit as he got to the door, but he couldn't care less about it at the moment and pushed his way inside. The thick nauseous smell of medicine assaulted his nose as soon as he stepped inside through the door, and relief washed over him as he saw them both awake, though Isaac still looked a little sleepy and worse than Erica. The first thing that came to his mind after the relief he felt was to hug them tight, but that feeling was utterly crushed as his feeling of regret came in bashing through the door. Hey guys, how are you feeling? He managed to ask as he made his way to their beds with a false calm gait. No matter what he felt was most important at this moment was making sure that they were doing better than before. We look like shit, man. How can you even ask that? Isaac said with a chuckle, his voice lacking the youthful exuberance it used to carry. When Derek got close enough, he could feel their emotions in shambles and little bits of tears gathering at the edge of their eyes. I'm so sorry. His voice croaked as he hugged them. They couldn't hold it anymore and wept out part of their fears and trauma after finally escaping what felt like a hellish nightmare. It took Derek to understand what his beta meant to him, and when he did, he just couldn't help but cherish them more. A family. As someone who lost his entire family, he more than anyone knew just how important and priceless such a bond was. They finally stopped crying and only Erica kept letting out silent sobs, both feeling like a weight had been lifted off their chest. So you trust us now? Isaac couldn't help but ask as he remembered Derek's words a while ago, while the receiver of his words, Derek, winced at his question but nevertheless answered honestly. 100%. Isaac looked at Derek's eyes, searching for a hint of lie and smiling faintly when he found none. Cool then. I guess all those torture weren't for nothing after all. Gerard, is he dead? Erica asked after finally getting her emotions in a semblance of control. Derek shook his head but made them a promise he very well intended to fulfill by any means. No yet, but he'll soon very well be. We want to join you in killing him. He took something very important from us. Erica's words made all of their eyes harden. What did he do? Derek's next words stayed in his tongue and couldn't roll off as he saw Erica and Isaac's eyes glow up in a cold blue that was all too familiar to him. No more words needed to be said. He understood. It was always due to a werewolf's taking the life of an innocent person that made their eyes turn blue. Even though it rarely happens, a beta's eyes can turn blue due to them experiencing a severe traumatic experience that forever stigmatizes them, turning their once bright golden eyes into an unfeeling blue. Regardless to say, this was just another reason in the sky-high pile of other reasons that Derek had for wanting to kill the old bastard. The McCall house. Stiles was staying the night over at Scott's house, and without it being needed to be said, none of them could sleep well after what they saw during the day at the underground Argent torture chamber. You think that's what they do to every other werewolf they catch? If they don't kill them off immediately, they torture them for information and then kill them. Scott asked. He was very affected by what he saw and couldn't help but be profoundly worried. While Derek, and even Tristan to a little extent, had to tell him that it was important to be resolved to kill any time the moment for it calls, he didn't truly understand why they all had that mindset, until today that is. Stiles, who was on the bed with him, grumbled irately at his attempt of catching a semi-good night's sleep masterfully interrupted. I really don't know what to say, Scott. I don't think they were just being murder-loving by telling you that, and I know you know that too. Still, I can tell that torturing them the way Gerard did probably took it a bit too far for even the standards of the Argent. Stiles gave his honest opinion. Scott's face fell aghast at what Stiles' words insinuated. A bit too far? They looked like two strung-up pieces of butchered meat, Stiles. Stiles rolled his eyes and stared at Scott sarcastically. Really? A family of hunters that have no qualms killing teenage werewolves are against torturing them if they can gain more information from it. Yeah, no, Scott. I don't fucking think so. Scott looked dumbfounded but ended up sighing and drawing the blanket up to his neck. Don't worry, buddy. You've got me by your side, right? I'm pretty sure I can think up a few things to save our ass if it comes to it. Stiles said but looked at Scott as if he suddenly remembered something. But if there's a chance I might survive by giving you up to them, know that I'm taking it. Old Stiles shouldn't have to die because of you being a furry. Fuck off, Stiles. Scott flipped him off and they both laughed, forgetting their bleak future for now and just focused on getting some sleep. Chapter 110, Chapter 107. When Tristan and Malia pulled up on the driveway of their school the next morning, the pair had to roll their eyes at each other at the uncanny coincidence of them arriving at just the same time as Allison's dad pulled up to the spot right beside them with Allison in tow. The three of them alighted the car at the same time, and even though they weren't looking at him directly, they could see the older Argent's frigid stare at them. This entire thing could have been avoided if everyone just remained ignorant for a bit longer. Tristan muttered under his breath as he could still feel Chris Argent's stare even when they entered the school. Malia, who was at his side and heard what he said, narrowed her eyes, sending him a pending glare. Is that a non-obvious way of saying it's my fault? Tristan looked at her for a second and turned his head back. I'm just saying what I'm thinking. He didn't give her a direct answer because it wasn't meant to be a dig. If he wanted it as a dig, he would have made sure she knew he was digging at her. Wait, if Gerard just bolted, who is going to be our principal? I very much doubt he'll be coming back after yesterday's drama. Tristan said as the random thought just came to his head. Yesterday wasn't a drama, Tristan. While Tristan didn't bother to look at who said that, Malia spared Allison a glance and snorted. Finally decided to say something. Allison wanted to say something but shook her head and apologized. I'm sorry. I had thought I wasn't the only one who felt awkward by what happened back there, but I guess I was just overthinking. Did you guys manage to get some sleep? She asked but soon realized how stupid that sounded after seeing the unbothered look on their faces. Right, stupid question. None of them said anything again, and Allison was just thankful that it was no longer awkward, since it turns out she was the only one who felt like that. Allison! Lydia's shout echoed through the hallway, which attracted a lot of attention to them as Lydia made her way towards them. You didn't return any of my texts yesterday. Oh, hey Tristan. Tristan only nodded at her and threw his bag into his locker and just took out a book for the first period. Allison tried explaining why she couldn't reply to any of Lydia's texts throughout yesterday, but the strawberry blonde still looked skeptical but relented and accepted the apology for what it is. So where are we hanging out after school? Lydia asked, somewhat excited at the idea of it while confused Allison and Malia while Tristan mostly zoomed it out. It's not that he wasn't interested in the current conversation, well he wasn't, but he did not see a need to be in it, and Ms. Morrell's words still had him on edge about Lydia. At least a little bit. Malia massaged her temples while Allison looked awkward, and Lydia, being sharp enough to notice the little nuances of their behavior, assumed something different even if it was perfectly normal for her to think so. You know, if you don't want to hang out with me you can just say it and I won't have to disturb you about it again. She looked downcast and hurt as she said that, and this drew Tristan's attention. Though he wasn't looking at her, he could practically smell something akin to a suicidal thought wafting over her. It was as if her self-esteem were at an all-time low. I wonder what she saw when she was in her coma. He thought offhandedly. While upon hearing Lydia's clearly hurt words, Allison hurriedly tried to explain to Lydia why she wouldn't be available today. Taking her time to clear any type of dark thoughts Lydia might be having, because who was she going to have do it? Malia? HYY guys. Hey, still weird every time I see it. Boyd said as he joined the group while muttering the last part to himself. Without nothing else to add, the day went just like how it always does for the four of them. 5. Now that Lydia seems to be hanging out with them. For a friendship group of social outcasts like the four of them, having someone like Lydia was bound to draw a lot of attention, and that was what ended up happening every time she walked around them. After school ended, Lydia left since she was called by her mother, who had surprisingly applied as a teacher in Beacon Hills, leaving Allison alone with Tristan and Malia after Boyd went home to play Dungeons and Dragons. I think my dad will be here any minute now, but before that, I want to ask, how is Isaac and Erica doing? Will they make it? Allison asked in concern. It's surprising seeing an Argent worried about a werewolf. Tristan's reply made Allison smile wryly. Ouch, Tristan. She winced. I might be an Argent, and even if I'm not friends with them doesn't mean I can't sympathize with how cruel Gerard treated them. Tristan shrugged. They'll make it. He simply said, which was all Allison wanted to hear. If you are this worried for Isaac and Erica, then that means you won't mind if Derek kills your dear grandpa? Malia asked. It didn't need to be said to understand that Derek was out for blood, and if he wanted a full justice on what was done to Isaac and Erica, no one could really call him out for it if he decided to go after the entire family than just a man. Right. That was still in play. Honestly, I wouldn't feel anything if Derek killed Gerard, and somehow just thinking like that frightens me on how much I've changed. Allison said while resting her head on her hands as the trio sat on the stairs as they waited for Allison's dad to show up. Don't sweat it. I think you're handling it pretty well and can at least make rational decisions. Tristan said, and then nudged Allison with his leg and pointed at her father's car, which just drove into the school. We'll talk later. Try not to think too much. He said, and then helped Malia get up, which earned him an eye roll from Allison. They all walked together, and this somehow didn't sit well with Chris as his eyes went cold as he walked towards them. Dad. Seeing the prelude of what looked like a death match from her father's eyes, Allison had to stop him from making any rash moves and complicating things more than they already were. I told you to stay away from them, Allison. This is something I won't tolerate. Chris glared at his daughter and then turned to the other two. And you, don't give me a reason for me to want to put a bullet in your skull. He warned. While he might have a tacit no-aggression truce with Satomi, that doesn't automatically make it okay for him to allow his daughter to mingle with them. Just because they weren't enemies at the moment didn't mean they could be friends instead. Unfortunately, his threat wasn't well received by either Tristan or Malia. We shouldn't give you a reason to kill us. How about we give you a pair of reasons then? Chris almost reflexively reached for his gun and aimed it at one of their heads after he saw himself being stared at by two pair of blue eyes. Dad, stop. How about we just go home and stop drawing attention to ourselves? Allison said as she jumped between her dad and her friends to try once more to stop them from fighting in their school parking lot and exposing everything. We are talking about it once we get home. Now get in the car. His face was all she needed to know that her dad was mad pissed and looked like he would force her into the car if she tried to say anything else. See you tomorrow, Allison. Malia waved at Allison as she got in her dad's car while said dad looked like he was one more word from losing every single bit of composure he had. You know you didn't have to provoke him further, right? Tristan asked as he sat back and enjoyed the ride as Malia drove them home. Malia, well, she didn't look as if she cared all at that much and replied nonplussed. He's already hostile to us for no reason, so I thought I'd just make it complete. Her pale boyfriend shook his head, wondering why he expected something different for her reasons. Hopefully he doesn't lose it one day because of you and decides to copy Gerard, but knowing you, you might just find a way to make it happen. Malia laughed but didn't deny his words either. If he meant it as a joke then it was funny. And if he didn't mean it as a joke, well, it was still funny. Chapter 111, Chapter 108. I just got off the phone with Elias. He said Derek already started his hunt for Gerard, want to help him sniff the old fuck out. Malia crashed into the sofa and laid her head on Tristan's thighs while grinning upwards at him. Tristan however shook his head. Let the alpha do his thing, Malia. And besides, I don't think we'll be of much help even if we wanted. Malia pouted and forcefully hit his legs with her head. I'm just giving a suggestion, doofus. You don't have to be so analytical about everything. Tristan's initial reply was a blank stare before he deigned to give a reply. Not that I was trying to be, but one of us has to be. Can't have the both of us being stupid at the same time. He rolled his eyes as she gave him the middle finger. Derek has more experience when dealing with hunters as opposed to us, and even if we were to help, where would we start? And don't count on me because I've got nothing on Gerard. So? We just do nothing? I don't like it. It's making me restless for some reason. Malia said, and while Tristan would have normally paid more attention to what her instincts were telling her, he was focused on something else entirely. What? She asked, seeing how he just kept staring at her. I think I know why you are restless. Was all he said, and not letting her ask anything else, he picked her up and she instinctively wrapped her legs around his waist. She was still stunned by what he was doing, but a twinkle came to her eyes when she sniffed the air and noticed the undeniable intoxicating whiff of his budding lust. Maybe this was why she was restless all along? Today should have been their third day in a row without sex. Tristan, you're a genius. She said with a laugh while Tristan nodded with a serious look on his face which made her laugh even more. Of course I am. He tried letting her down on the bed, but with her legs tightly cuffed around his waist, she easily pulled him in and hungrily took his lips. It might not be mating season for her, but that didn't matter with Tristan. Her lust skyrocketed and even past his, but that was just her nature as a coyote. With animalistic wildness, she ripped open his shirt into rags and clawed his back till it drew blood, and Tristan was no better. I liked that shirt. He mumbled between hot breaths. I'll take you shopping to get you another one. Pointless words were no longer said as they fully indulged in the greatest pleasure they could give the other. Their kiss quickly turned bloody, and with their bestial nature as wild carnivores, the blood only made their eyes more cloudy. Tristan pierced into Malia's neck with his fangs, which made her gasp as the pleasure she was feeling suddenly shot through another threshold. Her eyes turned blue and she bit into Tristan's neck, helping him feel the same pleasure she felt. They were both naked with splashes of blood all over their body, holding each other very close with fangs drawing blood from their mate while they had sex was the most primal connection and the highest form of bond they've ever shared with themselves. In this moment, it felt like they were truly one in body, heart, and blood. We're not stopping till the morning sun comes up tomorrow. Never planned to. They didn't need to speak to each other when they were like this because it felt as if they could hear what the other was thinking through the flesh and blood connection they were sharing. Derek Hale POV. My face lacked any emotion as I snapped the neck of the hunter in my hands, who stubbornly refused to give me the answer I wanted. I hope for your sakes that you are not as stubborn as he was, I said as I turned to the other hunters. In other times I would have relished in the rich smell of their fear, but that was the farthest thing on my mind at this moment. I'll ask you one more time. Where is Gerard Argent? No one. I cracked my neck and slowly approached them. Some stepped back terrified while the others steadily held out their weapons at me. I guess I'll have to rip it out of you myself. How tiring. Easily sidestepping from the trajectory of a gun and with a speed that none of them could match up to, I was already in their midst, and the terror they felt spiked up by a few levels. Even the brave ones were now slightly trembling. Breaking a man's arm at the shoulder, I took his rifle and used it to smash in the throat of the nearest hunter in arm's length. Run. We'll try to hold H. My claws dug out 5 lacerations from the forehead of a man who had been shouting down to his throat. I ducked under the spiked club that was swung from my back and used a quick back sweep to bring him down and forcefully punched a hole through his stomach that cracked the floor under him. Too messy. I clicked my tongue and slightly tilted my head to dodge the arrow they shot and caught it before it sailed past me. I threw the arrow and it went into the skull of a hunter before he could make a reaction of any kind. I didn't feel anything as I slashed my way through these hunters. Their numbers quickly dwindled and they realized too late as only a few of them were left and only now did they start begging that they'll tell me where Gerard was holing up. Promise you won't kill me if I tell you where he is. I ignored the one who said that and turned to another of the 4 hunters that remained and asked. Do you know where he is? To which he nodded. Crunch. I snapped the neck of the man who had asked for my word. And then there were 3. You, go. I said to the one who told me what I wanted and he started running as fast as he could while I killed the last 2. Walking out of the house that was now an abattoir, I saw a thick metal pole and picked it up. Good weight. And the length is just perfect. I was the ace of the basketball team during my time in high school and half courts were my favorite thing. Gets the crowd all riled up. I threw the pole and watched it sail perfectly through the air before descending and piercing through the body of unfortunate hunter. Should have taken something faster than your legs. I smiled as I looked up at the sky and could feel the moon slowly peeking through the clouds. While it was not a full moon, it was very close to one. I broke off into a sprint towards the location the hunter gave me. Since he couldn't lie to me, either Gerard was still there or he had left and the thought of him safely leaving Beacon Hills ignited my rage and made me faster. These hunters sure do love their bunkers. The place was dimly lit but that wasn't a problem for me as I easily made my way through it only to find that it was empty. He was gone. My anger bubbled up and was about to tip over until I caught a salty smell on the weapon rack. Sweat. For the first time since that day, a grin entered my face as I took a deep sniff of Gerard's sweat and soon the place came alive as I started identifying his scent all over the room. This is where the hunt truly begins. With Gerard's fresh scent as a tracker, I easily sniffed out a trail and even though he tried to hide it with something, he couldn't stop sweating every now and then. From my time with him I know that he's dying from cancer and it seems like his medication isn't doing too much when coupled with the stress he's facing by being hunted down. Normally Gerard would have nothing to fear with me hunting him down, might even dare to show his face to me, but that was before he had a step in his grave. It was why he was so desperate for the bite. Unfortunately for him, I not only have his sweat at my nose tip but also the smell of his car which left the place probably an hour ago. I can still catch up with him. I remember Erica saying that they wanted to have a piece of him but I honestly doubt I'll leave a piece of him for them to have once I catch him. I doubt I'll even enjoy a piece of him that's if I don't rip open his neck as soon as I see him. My eyes turned red and I could now clearly smell and even see the trail of the scent and I was getting closer. If you want the bite so much, I can give you more than one simple bite. Chapter 113, Chapter 109. With Chris and Allison. Really, Allison? After all we've told you, you still want to be friends with them? They are killers, Allison. To say Chris was livid would be an understatement of the year. The argument had started during their drive home when Chris had warned her for the last time that she should stay away from Tristan and Malia as both of them were werewolves, but Allison outright disagreed and that threw Chris into a fit of rage. They are my friends, Dad. For the first time in the past 10 years I finally have people I can call a friend and now you're telling me to stop talking to them? Why can't you just understand? Allison shouted back as they got inside their house. Understand what? Chris asked back, flabbergasted. What else was there to understand? Things couldn't be simpler but why is his daughter deliberately making it worse? They would have killed me if they wanted to, Dad. Malia has saved me from being killed on more than one occasion. Just why can't you understand that? She even saved me from dying when the Alpha attacked. Why would she if they wanted to kill me? Allison pushed back in indignation. There was a lot she wanted to say but only a few things came to mind as she and her father exchanged heated words. They've killed innocent people. You saw their eyes, right? Why are you still trying to defend them? By this time, Allison's mother, Victoria, had come down after hearing her daughter and husband shouting at each other. What is it? She asked while looking at the both of them but Chris just pointed his hands at Allison not knowing what more to say. Seeing her husband not saying anything while internally seething at one corner of the room, Victoria then turned to her daughter who looked equal parts fed up, angry and begging. Allison dear, what's happening? Allison looked between the two of her parents, already knowing her mother would agree with her husband over anything she wanted to say, still she said it. He said I shouldn't associate with neither Tristan nor Malia anymore. And? Obviously I refused. Why should I stop talking to them because of a stupid rule? Let me stop you there, young lady. Never call the code stupid, never. Her mother wanted with a stern gaze that actually made Allison fearful. And why would you refuse? Has everything me and your father taught you escaped your head? You will stop talking to them and this is final. Her mother's words and the tone of finality she spoke it with made the edge of Allison's eyes redden with tears, but she stifled it. We have entertained your willfulness for a long time now, but this cannot and will not pass. Have you forgotten that they killed your aunt? Victoria said while staring at Allison with a steel-cold gaze. Allison chuckled mockingly and looked at both of her parents. Yeah, the same Kate that burned down a whole house full of innocent werewolves and children, some of which were human. She followed the code all right. Mind your words, Allison. Chris warned in a low voice because no matter how warped and how unhinged Kate had become, she was still his younger sister who he had spent a lot of his childhood with. Instead of quieting down like her father had asked, Allison became even more incensed and retorted sharply. And what of Gerard? He tortured 2 innocent teenagers and you know that they are innocent, don't you? He didn't care about the code when he did all those barbaric acts to them and you knew. The entire house fell as both Chris and Victoria stared dumbfoundedly at their daughter while Allison stared defiantly at her 2 parents before snorting as she walked away. Yeah, I thought so. She slowly made her way back to her room, not in the mood to do anything so she just crashed on her bed. I hate this. She brought out her phone and looked at her call logs, contemplating whether or not to call either Tristan and Malia. She was finding it harder to trust her parents as both of them knew about Gerard and didn't do or say anything to stop it. The same with Kate. She was having a hard time seeing her family as the ones in the right. She could tell that their moral code was warped and she was scared of becoming like them, becoming like Kate. Despite what any of her parents said, she would walk by her own code. A very clear line set by herself. One that would be very visible anytime she crossed it or attempted to, unlike the obscure code her family have been following for centuries. Shit guys. I really don't want to feel this bad on my own. At the end of it all, she felt like she was betraying her parents and rejecting all the effort they put into raising and training her. Everything was just complicated. Derek Hale POV. He finally tracked Gerard's scent into a tunnel and just from his first look at it, he easily concluded that Gerard probably had the place lined up with traps, but he wasn't in the mood to think about precautions and options. His pace slowed down considerably after he entered the tunnel, scanning every corner of it that came across his vision with red eyes that glowed illuminant in the dark tunnel. Your escape ends here, Gerard. Why don't you come out so we can finish our previous conversation, MHM? His voice reverberated through the tunnel, but Derek paid it no mind as he kept his ears open for the slightest sound. He winced painfully as a grating frequency sounded all over the tunnel and entered his ears, forcing him to turn off his super hearing. Nice trick. Is that all? He followed the faint scent of Gerard, noting how scarce the scent was in the tunnel. He's actively trying to hide it. He knew he was getting closer because the grating frequency in his ears got progressively louder. Derek wasn't wasting his time and would have long since found Gerard, but the frequency, the loss of his scent, and the arrows that would shoot at him every now and then made him waste his time. And not only that, he felt like Gerard was actively moving, possibly leading him to a bigger trap. Not to mention that the old man would likely call for reinforcements. But the thought of what his betas suffered under Gerard's hands and how he also lost his family to Gerard's daughter made his rage flare even greater, and for an alpha like him, being in rage made him exponentially more terrifying. He forced himself and broke through the traps, gaining some nicks and cuts here and there while also dodging the arrows he could. Derek Hale. A pity the once powerful Hale line of werewolves will end with a hot-blooded idiot like you. But then again, this was something that should have happened a long time ago if my daughter had done her job perfectly. Gerard's voice boomed through the speakers, all in the name of taunting Derek more and making him fall into a deeper rage. While Derek knew this, due to his current state, it did its job in successfully provoking him. Having gotten more closer than Gerard was comfortable with, Derek's heart beat faster and he couldn't help but get excited. He burst through the room and what he came across was Gerard holding a rifle in his direction that he didn't hesitate in letting the trigger go. Despite his excitement, Derek was still conscious of the danger Gerard posed, so he dodged back and hid behind the walls just for his previous location to be riddled with bullets. He cursed as he couldn't use his hearing as the frequency emitter was inside the room and was now messing with his ears and balance that he felt slightly dizzy. Why have you come here, Derek? Are you that eager to die? Gerard taunted, but this time Derek was a bit more poised and didn't blindly fall for it. This tunnel will soon start to be filled with hunters coming for your head. Gerard said, but Derek showed no reaction and kept his inner thoughts to himself. He pushed through the pain and dizziness in his head and forced himself to listen to what Gerard was doing, and luckily for him, the moment he was waiting for came quicker. The slight click from the gun that signifies an empty cartridge was the cue Derek needed as his body blurred into the room and was a few meters from Gerard in the blink of an eye. His hands went straight for Gerard's neck under the shocked and slightly fearful gaze of the old, but his hands impacted against a barrier just a few centimeters from Gerard's neck. Mountain ash. Derek said casually, as if it was something he had expected. You lose, Derek. Now, how about we talk about ? You might want to keep your mouth closed for this one. Gerard watched as Derek used his hands and ripped the doors off his hinges before turning back to Gerard with a sadistic smile on his face. Chapter 114, Chapter 110. Before Gerard could say another word, Derek threw the door at Gerard's old body, and while the man had tried bracing himself so as not to step outside the circle, he gravely underestimated the strength at which Derek threw the door at him. He effortlessly sailed through the air and out of the circle as the door impacted him. He crashed into the ground, bleeding from his head and lips and also suffering from the pain from his hurt knee. He however proved the strength of his mental fortitude and only let out a groan as he impacted the ground knee first. He felt himself being yanked by the neck before his eyes could even stabilize, and without saying anything extra, Derek broke both of his shoulders, making the old man let out groans of pain. Look at me. His face morphed as he shape-shifted just a few centimeters away from Gerard's face. The rage-filled howl that escaped his lungs soon after traveled through every room and crevice inside the tunnel they were in. The howl also alerted the group that were hastily making their way towards Gerard's location, and among that group was Chris Argent, who got informed as soon as he heard that some of Gerard's men were moving towards this tunnel. If one were to ask why he was here, then he'd say he had absolutely no idea. Did he care for Gerard? No, not after he held a gun to his granddaughter's head. Did he want Gerard dead? Now that was a little bit complicated. On the other side of the tunnel, Derek growled at Gerard with his face looking more animalistic than it normally was whenever he shape-shifted. He dug his hands into Gerard's pockets and brought out the emitter before crushing it and returning serenity back to his wounded ears. Despite death looming over him in the form of a twisted alpha, Gerard scowled at him before spitting on his face. This power was supposed to be mine. If I had known this was how it would have turned out, then I would have killed those two rabid dogs of yours when I first had the chance. He gritted his teeth, refusing to let out a whimper of pain as Derek's claws dug into his shoulder blades. Don't worry, you won't get the chance again. Derek sneered. His voice was just as twisted as his face, and combined with how scary he currently looked, he perfectly fitted the image of a horror monster. He tried listening to his betas and captured Gerard to let them have a chance at the bastard, but when he had the man in his hands, fingers wrapped around his neck, the only thing that went through his mind was to make sure he died as painfully as possible. He looked around the room and found a locked rusted chain and broke off the lock and tied Gerard's hands with it and hooked him up to a protrusion in the wall. The image in front of him was a crudely made replica of the state Isaac and Erica were in. All he was missing was the injuries. He knew the hunters were rushing their way here, but he couldn't be bothered about that right now. Digging his claws into Gerard's tied-up wrist, he held the bundled-up skin and drew it down as if he was peeling a banana. Unfortunately for Gerard, the banana peel ended up cutting halfway, so Derek had to do another peel. Gerard was breathing heavily at this point as the pain was very overwhelming, and looking at Derek's face, he saw in the alpha's eyes that he was not enjoying the torture and looked as if he was doing it because he had to. A necessity rather than a choice of will. Digging his claws into Gerard's knees, he forcefully brought out the two kneecaps, and that finally made Gerard scream in untold pain. You're not a good person, Gerard. You're not. Derek's body moved as if it had a mind of its own, finding the most optimal slashing and tearing of skin that will bring him the most pain. The more he did this, the more bestial his face became and his eyes shone brighter. His claws grew a bit longer and thicker, as well as turning another shade darker. Being tortured while also being forced to watch and listen to his betas being tortured broke something in Derek that was slowly starting to emerge. His scarlet eyes turned a darker shade while also increasing its intensity. Even now he could hear the heavy footsteps and sounds of doors being kicked down as the hunters hurriedly searched for Gerard, but he still continued what he was doing. Memories of his past as a young naive beta flashed in his mind, and a single tear fell off his left eye as he wondered what his mother would say to the current him. In essence, he was no different from Peter, whom he had killed and took the alpha spark from. Finally he stopped and took a step back and looked at Gerard. The almost 60-year-old grandfather had blood painted on every part of his body except his head, which only had a small wound and busted lips. The rest of his body however had patches of skin cut out and all of his joints to his toes were either shattered or plucked out. And there Derek stood. 7 seconds. 5 seconds. 4 seconds. 3 seconds. 2 seconds. He listened as Gerard's heart finally gave out after what felt like an eternity of torture to him. Derek looked at his hands and felt them slightly trembling and took a deep breath and held it for a few breaths before releasing it. He looked at his hands again and they were steady. Better. He didn't look at Gerard again, completely forgetting man as he was no longer of any relevance now and in the future. He walked out of the room with slow and steady steps, a calm poise as if he didn't just torture a man to death in the most brutal way he could. Over here. I register some movements. Someone shouted and soon enough flashlights started on Derek's who was currently strolling towards them. Derek, your hands where I can see them. You are surrounded, there's nowhere for you to escape from. Chris said as he and everyone with him leveled their guns at Derek. One by one, they started noticing Derek's state and what they all saw was blood fully covering his hands from his fingers to his elbows as if he dipped them in red paint. Blood was splattered across his face and all over his clothes. They immediately understood given that they had heard Gerard's screams for a little while before it died. Where's Gerard, Derek? Chris asked, still feeling complicated about the whole thing. He's back there. He's not in a good shape though. Derek replied with no emotion in his voice and took another step but that resulted in weapons held dangerously against him as if daring him to take another step. Do you really want to do this, Chris? The Alpha's red eyes shone as he stared at the Argent Patriarch. You might be able to kill me here, but I can assure you that I will kill more than half the people here before you can get that chance. If you still want to fight me then I'm more than ready. Derek's deep voice bellowed out and his fangs and claws shot out, showing just how ready he was. Chris, still conflicted, looked at Derek and noted a few visible differences from his present werewolf form that was not present the last time they fought. He's mutating. He concluded. Weighing his choices, he lowered his gun and ordered those behind him to do the same. Though most of them were very hesitant, mostly those that followed Gerard, they nevertheless relented and lowered their weapons. Anyone with a working brain could take two guesses of what happened in the room Derek and Gerard had been, so was there really a need to fight? If this had been normal times and Derek had done something like this, it would have been war. One that would have ended up with Derek and his pack annihilated, of that there was no doubt. But now? As Derek walked past them, they made a way for him and he calmly walked through their middle, but when he walked past Chris, the new patriarch whispered a question to him. The blood debt is cleared with this, right? Derek paused and looked at Chris. The look in his eyes was one the young Alpha understood very well. They had shed too much blood in this feud and taking it any farther would result in either one or both being completely wiped out. Yes, it is. Derek nodded slightly and walked away. He didn't want to fight with anyone for a while after this if he could help it. After he left, Chris and the others ran towards the room Derek came out from and what they saw made a few of them throw up the nest instant. Chris' fingers wrapped the butt of his gun so tight that a dent might have formed in it. Allison wasn't the only one who felt complicated by everything that has been happening recently, he too felt complicated. That's why he wanted Allison not to complicate things even more with her relationship with Tristan and Malia. And we're going to let this go, sir? Let's go back and kill that fucker and then kill all his betas. This is war. One of the older hunters in the group said and started riling up the others, but Chris coldly put a stop to it. No, we don't do anything. This feud has gone on for far too long. Chris said. He still remembered seeing the Buddhist Alpha saving Derek and he didn't want to fight against two Alphas at the same time. Get someone to bag his body. What we have to get ready for now is burying him. It went without saying that a lot of them were utterly pissed off and disappointed with Chris' decisions, but the man could care less at the moment. Cover his body and let's go back. There's nothing left to do here. Chris said and left the room with a heavy heart. Was it worth it? He couldn't avenge Kate, and now he decided against avenging Gerard. He remembered what Allison had said about the code and wondered if she was really right. Should morals be taken into the equation when it comes to duty? I need a drink. In Lydia Martin's house, Lydia sat on the desk in her room and was making a sketch of the human anatomy for her biology assignment while also humming a tone to herself absent-mindedly as she drew. They are going to die. Chapter 115, Chapter 111. Tristan was back in Elias' house, helping him look after Derek's betas who had finally retracted their steps from death's door. Whatever Satomi used as some sort of supernatural ointment worked like a charm and they were both completely healed up, at least physically. There was no doubt that both Erica and Isaac, especially the latter, had deep-rooted trauma due to the torturous experience he was subjected to. "Hey, do you know where Derek ran off to?" Erica asked. Tristan, who was in the kitchen making brunch, looked up at her and shook his head. "My guess is that he's hunting Gerard. Where he is right now, I have no idea." Erica seemed to accept that as she nodded, inwardly feeling a bit angry since Derek still didn't bother to bring them along on his hunt. She looked at Tristan again and looked at herself and Isaac, wondering what was the difference between them. "How do you do it?" she ended up asking. "Do what?" "You know, like." Isaac cut in at that point. "Derek says you're stronger, maybe the strongest beta he's seen. That's why your alpha doesn't worry about you and what you do." Tristan stopped what he was doing and looked at them, silently hoping that he wouldn't be the one to help them with their psychological wounds. "You said it, right? It's because I'm strong." Even though he hoped it would end there, neither Erica nor Isaac looked to be satisfied with his answer. "But how? Is it an age thing? Like you grow stronger the older you become?" Tristan shook his head and went back to what he was doing while keeping an ear open for them. "Definitely not. It's honestly based on two things, at least for werewolves, and maybe other supernatural creatures that live in groups, bonds, and a reason to fight." The two of them fell silent at that, unable to show the appropriate reaction they should have had for Tristan's words. Erica, a little flabbergasted, couldn't help but ask. "Bonds?" Tristan nodded. "Are you kidding me? I've heard it 100 times from Derek, but it was more of a physiological, something meta, or shit like that," Isaac said. He wouldn't say he didn't understand the meaning of their bond with Derek, he absolutely did, but he had no idea it could be weaponized, so to speak. That's basically it. That's why it's imperative for an alpha to have a pack, or else he's just a stronger beta, all things considered," Tristan further added. The both of them nodded in understanding acceptance and pushed it aside for now, knowing asking Derek will be much better than Tristan's explanation. "As for a reason, I'm sure you already have that down," Tristan said. After all, what they went through was something most supernaturals never go through throughout their lives, he and Malia included, along with almost the entirety of their pack. It would be weird if they remained the same, naive and weak, after all that. "About time," Tristan muttered, and just then Derek walked in through the door. All it took the trio was a glance and a whiff of the air around him to know that the man they were seeing was different from the last time they saw him. A staggering difference. "You." Tristan wanted to say something but held his tongue despite the murky and feral feeling he was getting from Derek and let him have his time with his betas. He left the three of them to discuss whatever they wanted, but the feeling he got from Derek told him all he needed to know about Gerard's survival. "I'd say things will go back to normal after this, but that'll be too much of a jinx," he muttered. 2 hours later, after having a rather lengthy talk with the Buddhist alpha, Derek was ready to leave with his betas. On his way to his car where Isaac and Erica were waiting for him, he came across Tristan, who looked as if he needed something from him. "You want something?" "Not much as wanting, but more of hearing." "What are you going to do after this?" This question was something Satomi also asked Derek during their hour-long talk, and the reason for this is that Beacon County needed an alpha atop its hills. Satomi couldn't, because it'd go against her values and teachings of detaching herself as much as possible from the world, and because the Hale family and its pack acted as the chief of the hills back in the day when other alphas were around. And so Derek's answer to both Satomi and Tristan was pretty much obvious without him putting much thought to it. "We're still around. This used to be my family's territory and now it's mine. Concerning the Argents, I doubt Chris will be coming after me anytime soon unless I give him a reason to." "I see." Derek chuckled at what he perceived as relief from the stone-faced teen. "Don't worry. While I don't trust him, I doubt he'd blatantly try to come after you and Malia using his daughter." Tristan tilted his head in slight confusion at Derek's words. "Trust me, while that's a valid worry, I don't care for it all that much." Whistle. "I don't know if you're apathetic or just cold," Derek remarked after seeing that Tristan was being truthful. Unlike what he would expect from you betas, the boy in front of him was more than prepared to kill his friend if the situation called for it. Tristan shrugged at the comment. "It's none of that. I'm being practical, or at least I'm trying to be." Derek patted Tristan's shoulder, his respect for the latter growing another step higher. "If I didn't know any better, I'd say being cold-hearted is a trait of all vampires. Take care, Tristan. I'll see you later." Seeing Derek leaving for his car where the duo of Erica and Isaac were growing progressively impatient, Tristan called out. Got any immediate plans? Yeah, they're both right there. Derek replied without turning back. Tristan watched as they drove away, noting how quick the three-man pack transformed. Into what? Of that he had no idea. What he was sure of, however, is that they were a lot more dangerous now than they've ever been. An obvious outcome, but surprising still. That's a little bit out of character for you. Showing care for others outside the family. Satomi, who was now standing beside him, idly commented. Tristan turned to her, face blank, an expression that would have fooled others, but she saw clearly the exasperated look in those eyes. Tristan sighed, fueling Satomi's amusement further. Grandma, why would you of all people think it's impossible for me to care for others? Oh my dear boy, it's not that I think it's impossible, but it's that you make people think so. It's just that you put your duty to your family above all else to freely care. She had a proud gleam in her eyes as she looked at him. He had come a long way from the little child with dead eyes that she found in the forest, but he still had a long way to go. As a child who learns from what he sees and experiences, she knew what his problem was but didn't bother telling him. A fulfilling life is a journey of self-discovery. Tristan, however, didn't see the same reasoning as his grandmother. But I wholly consider Allison a friend. And my respect for Derek at this point makes us friendly, at the very least. True. She replied, agreeing with his words. Let's use the young Allison as an example. Sure. Tristan said, wondering where she was going with this. First of all, your honest opinion, you and Allison Argent, who do you think is more of a friend to the other? Without hesitation, Tristan answered. Definitely her. Satomi clicked her fingers at him. Correct. And that's the difference between the two of you. She stopped there and just smiled at his confused eyes, not explaining anything more. I have to visit a friend, so I'll see you all later when I'm back. Tristan scratched his head, utterly confused by how cryptic Satomi has been with her words recently, especially when speaking to him. His thoughts were, however, cut short by the vibration of his phone in his pockets. He took it out and the slightest hint of his lips twitching showed as he saw the caller. Allison. Hey Tristan. What's up? Need something? He asked. It was a little rare for Allison to call him instead of texting him, which was also not a frequent thing. No. I just felt like talking. She paused a bit before replying. And that was another sigh. You heard. Allison's sigh then came through the speaker. Yeah. My dad is making a few calls concerning the funeral. It's just, honestly, I don't even know how to feel. I've known him for years as this very doting grandpa, the best. But your last memories of him are the exact opposite. Sigh. Yeah. I just needed to talk to someone, and between you and Malia, I thought you'd understand better. To be honest, I honestly don't. Tristan said, but paused for a bit, his most recent conversation with his grandma playing in his head. I'm free at the moment. So even if I don't understand, I think I can lend an ear for a while. Allison. Oh, right. Thanks. Honestly, I had no idea what response to expect when I decided to call you. Chapter 116, Chapter 112. With a newspaper in his hands, reading a featured article that reported his father's death with a serene look on his face, Chris Argent sat on a bench in the subway as he waited for the next train. Looking at his watch, he noted the time was 10:15, and just as soon as he did that, he heard the familiar horn of the train and stood up along with the other passengers waiting to board. Entering the compartment, he saw that it was almost empty with only 6 people in it. 5 of them were standing behind the 6th, who was sitting, an old woman comparable to Gerard in age. With relaxed steps, he made his way towards the woman and sat in her booth. His eyes noted the position of the men, clearly understanding how screwed he would be if a fight broke out, unless he took the woman in front of him hostage. Something he'd never do even if he had twice the courage. Christian. She called out with a smile on her face. Quite far from home, aren't you? I didn't know the Calaveras had business in America. Chris' words drew snorts from the 2 men directly behind the old woman while she just chuckled to herself. Oh my Joe, don't play dumb. She jokingly chided. Home to us hunters, is anywhere we are needed. Which is why I'm saying you're far from home. Chris said. His blatant refusal to humor her and the demeanor he carried himself with since he stepped inside the compartment told just how serious he was. Doubly more so when it came to the woman in front of him. From the top hunting family of Mexico, one equally comparable to the Argents in size and influence, sat the matriarch of the Calavera Aurelia Calavera. Unlike the Argents however, while they did strictly adhere to the code like an imperial law, they were very ruthless in their dealings with werewolves and other supernatural creatures that fell in their radar. An extremist hunting family would be Chris Argent's description of them. Especially the woman in front of him. Learn to appreciate humor, Nino. It'll help you stay sane for a while longer. Like a mirror's reflection, without even moving a muscle, she displayed the same serious look Chris had. What are you going to do now? Not only did you lose your sister, but also your father, Gerard, a peer of mine. I want to know what the patriarch of the Argent family plans to do now, specifically concerning the last Hail Alpha. Pretenses and humor cast aside, she went straight to the point of her visit. Chris folded his hands, already expecting a reason like this, but it still irritated him to no end regardless. Nothing. Chris' interruption left her and her entourage a bit perplexed. What do you mean? She asked tentatively. With arms folded across his chest, Chris reiterated his words. Exactly that, nothing. Until further provocation or breach of the code, the Argent family will keep a watchful distance from Derek Hale and his pack. Chris' words sounded like a bomb in the ears of those in the compartment. It took a second for it to fully register, and when it did, the hands of the 5 men behind Aurelia Calavera went straight to gun holsters, but a raised hand from Aurelia stilled their hands. Casting a severe look at Chris, the old matriarch confronted him on his words with a frigid tone. Explain yourself, Christian Argent. Are you surrendering to the wolf that killed your father? Chris remained unfazed at her implicating accusation and replied calmly. No such thing. First of all, the workings of the Argent family and my decisions that guide it affects nothing that should concern you or your family. Secondly, I admit that my family were in the wrong with Kate's actions, and the events that followed were in retaliation to that. That doesn't excuse your surrender. Because it's not a surrender. It's a truce, and last I checked, this isn't the first time something like this has happened. The blood feud has been resolved, and like I'm sure you very much understand, both Kate and my father's death were a result of them breaking the code that has guided all hunting family for centuries. They killed innocent humans and werewolves with their actions. Chris had long pondered on it, and in his efforts to make everything less complicated, he decided to simply adhere to the code. He could cross the line with ease if he wanted, but that was something he resolved to do only if he was forced to. Not caring for how much his words must have driven her to a seething rage, he continued. The Calaveras and the Argents have been allies for a long time, and I hope that continues. What I however will not allow to stand is the mindless bloodshed Kate's action caused. Hearing all what Chris had said, the old matriarch pushed aside her anger at what she perceived as the hubris of a younger generation and calmly pondered his words. And what reason do you have for not honoring a respected hunter such as Gerard's death? She questioned. If before Chris' voice had flowed like a calm and tranquil lake, now it held the coldness of a waterfall hitting against rocks. He threatened to kill my daughter. Now she was surprised, not too shocked by it, but very surprised. And before that, he tortured Derek Hale's betas to force him to give him the bite. That alone is more than enough reason for me to leave his body to rot in the wild, whether by my duty as a father to protect his child or the duty that falls on me as the Argent patriarch to carry out punishments to those who break the code. The two family heads stared at each other, Aurelia Calavera with a scrutinizing gaze while Chris Argent with cold resolved eyes. Their tense stare down was broken with a hearty laugh from the Calavera matriarch. Oh my Joe! You will make a very fine hunter with eyes like that. Sometimes I envy you Argents. She said as she stood up and dusted the sleeves of the shirt she wore. And here I thought that I'd have to remind you of what it means to be a hunter and the head of a hunting family. Don't disappoint me now, my Joe. Chris snorted. With all due respect, my actions are not for you to judge, but don't worry. I don't plan on sullying my family's name. I take it you won't be attending the funeral. She shook her head. Seeing my peers being put in a box and buried under the ground is a sour reminder of how close my time in this world is to running out. I'd rather have it take me by surprise if I am to choose. She responded with a wizened smile. Chris nodded and stood up with a stretched out hand that was taken for a firm handshake that he even felt an acute tingle from her tight grip. I'm dropping off at the next stop. Do extend my greetings to your wife and daughter. As she spoke, one of the men behind her came forward and draped an overcoat over her. I doubt you've had the chance to exchange pleasantries. This is my son, Severo. The two men nodded at each other in cordiality after a handshake. The train came to a stop and they followed being their matriarch and left Chris alone. What it means to be a hunter, hey. he muttered while slipping back into his seat until something caught his sight. An old tarot card with a skull on its back, the symbol of the Calaveras. A token of their continued friendship. He took the card and alighted the train after a few more stops. Tristan Hayes POV. Tristan grimaced in a show of visible annoyance as he and his friends sat in their usual spot in the cafeteria. Only this time they were joined by more than a few people. Though he ignored them, he could somewhat understand why Erica and Isaac were sitting with them. It's not any secret that he has helped Derek out a couple of times, and so it was due to their alpha's trust in him and friendly relation with his alpha. Understandable. Stiles and Scott? Probably tagging along with Erica and Isaac, as Scott is still considered Derek's beta, and maybe a sense of camaraderie due to them joining hands in helping save Derek and his pack. Annoying but relatable, so he fully ignored them. The problem, however, and also the reason for the tempting desire to sink his fangs in one of their necks, came from Lydia hanging out with them. Her presence in his friend circle drew in a small crowd of her usual clique, from guys from his team to girls from Lydia's group. The worst part of it all was that Lydia had no idea how to drive them away, and she too appeared a bit awkward, which she expertly hid thanks to her high social skills. "You look like you are about to flip the table and drive a fork into someone's neck," Boyd commented as he noticed the look on Tristan's face. He's gotten quite good at reading the usual blankness on his friend's face. Tristan shook his head. Definitely not a fork. He blocked out the chatter around him, the voice calling for his attention, and Erica trying to get a rise out of Malia and Allison by flirting with him. "If associating with all of them will prove that I can make friends, then I'm sorry, Grandma. I'm not making any more friends." Chapter 117, Chapter 113. "How about you don't bring the whole pageant with you to sit at our table?" Lydia shrugged at Allison, sitting her and Malia in the stands watching the lacrosse practice, and replied. "I can't actually turn off being awesome, now can I? I doubt being awesome is the real reason why they flock to you like bees to a flower." Malia retorted, and Allison automatically stepped in before the two could start a war of words, one which Lydia always won. "Can we just focus on the game? Please?" She partially had herself to blame for throwing a shade at Lydia, but it had to be said since the crowd made their lunchtime awkward, especially for Tristan and Boyd. Boyd was like a tortoise trying to shrivel back into his shell, while Tristan looked like he wanted to poke someone's eyes out. She sighed in relief as the two of them glared at each other and thankfully dropped the matter, for now at least. Although she knew that she'd soon find herself stuck between them again, a place that she has been finding herself recently. Lydia rolled her eyes at Malia and turned to watch the lacrosse practice taking place, but that dampened her mood even more. Seeing Tristan and Scott as co-captains made her remember Jackson, who died not too long ago. More like killed, she thought. Deciding to preserve whatever mental strength she had left in her, she pulled her eyes away from the game and opened a book to have a light read to pass the time and blocked the sounds from outside with the music from her headphones. She easily became engrossed in her own tranquil little world while the world around her moved just as it always had. Allison took a side glance at Lydia and saw that the girl was focusing on her and nudged Malia, who sat on her right. "You know that you don't have to confront her on everything, right? And you know that you don't have to force us to try to be friendly with each other, right?" Allison could only sigh and drop it. Was it so bad and selfish for her two only girlfriends to be friends with each other? Maybe this is their own way of bonding and they'll grow up to be great friends. She hoped weakly. Now what do those two think they are up to? She heard Malia say, and a few seconds of focusing on the game explained why. "Are they trying to one-up Tristan?" she asked after seeing Scott and Isaac strangely going to tackle Tristan every time he was passed the ball. "Hey! Watch it or I'll crack your skulls!" Malia yelled after they were successful in tackling Tristan to the ground and escaping a foul. She sat down with a huff after receiving a wave from Tristan. "Why does he have to be the only one to enjoy himself?" she complained. Allison only shook her head. "I doubt he's enjoying it the way you think he is. Only Malia will call the act of hurting someone without taking responsibility as fun." She got further confused as she watched the game and saw Tristan barely managing to escape their combined tackle and sometimes losing the ball. Shouldn't he be faster and more agile than that? Malia snorted at that. And display a talented level of sportsmanship? I very much doubt he fancies the thought of what that would bring him. You mean the attention? Malia nodded. So he's restraining himself to show a believable level of high school athleticism? Funny the lengths people will go to make a solid lie. Not like he has a choice to do otherwise. Malia sighed at what she thought was Tristan trying too hard to have fun and also partly irritated by the two cheating wolves. The game quickly got boring, at least for her, after coach subbed Tristan out when his rotation came. She played with her hair in boredom until her eyes started darting around to look for something that'll steal her attention until the practice ran out, and her eyes just so happens to land on Lydia, who was Allison's left, writing on her book. "Hey Bumblebee, what subject?" She called out to Lydia, but the latter ignored her, seemingly lost in whatever was playing in her head. While she would have left Lydia to her own at any other time, right now she was bored and her lively conversation partner was actively ignoring her. Why did she say actively? Because her hearing didn't pick up any sound from the headphones on Lydia's ears. She didn't think much and just yanked the book out of Lydia's grasp. Expecting the normal spiteful confrontation and having her own spiteful retort ready after she took the book, she was however surprised when Lydia didn't react in any way and just sat there. She frowned and looked at the book, French, but nothing she saw written in there was related to the subject in any way. "Hey princess, I think she's having a glitch." Her words took Allison's attention and both frowned deeper upon flipping to the next page. On it were numerous sketches of a tree stump and the undeniable sketch of corpses around it. She looked at Lydia and listened harder on what was playing on her headphones, and what she had thought was Lydia ignoring her couldn't be more wrong, as all she heard were faint grating static playing through the speakers. She reached over and yanked the headphones from Lydia, and that ended up snapping her out of whatever trance she had fallen in. What's happening?" Lydia asked in confusion upon seeing Allison and Malia staring at her, and then her eyes drifted to her book in Malia's hand. The pages were open and she saw what was scribbled all over her French note. The worst part was that she had no idea when she had taken out the note. Her words fell short as she didn't know what to say. "Lydia, are you okay?" Allison asked in concern and quickly grabbed the clearly distraught girl before she could make a flight decision. Lydia took in a deep breath and calmed her tumultuous emotions. "I think I'm going crazy." Instead of Allison comforting words, Malia's sneering was what she heard, along with something weird that caught her fixation. "I wish. Probably your Banshee thing at work again. I wonder who is dying this time." Malia idly commented. "What do you mean by my Banshee thing?" she asked confusedly, and now it was time for Allison and Malia to pause as the latter noted her slip. Seeing how they suddenly went silent and their awkward eye movements clued her in that they knew something that they weren't telling her, so she asked again, her voice clearly confrontational. "What do you mean by me being a Banshee? Guess the jig is up." "You're up, Allison." Malia had no interest in expanding the girl's worldview, so she passed the baton to her best friend. And just like that, Lydia's inquisitive gaze, tinted with an underlying plea, fell on Allison, who was still thinking if it was a good idea to continue playing ignorant. That was until Malia singled her out. "Fine, but not here. Come on." She beckoned on the two to follow her as she left the stands. "So let me get this straight, there's a real Halloween circus running around and somehow humans have no clue about it. And not only that, one of my two friends is a real-life Van Helsing and the other." Lydia squinted her eyes at Malia, "is a furry." That turned out to be the wrong choice of words, as she shrieked and hid behind Allison as Malia's eyes flashed blue and her nails extended into fierce claws. "Call me a furry again and I promise you that that will be the last time you use your tongue." Malia threatened, and her claws shrunk back to her clear nails. How? Seeing something and hearing it were two different things, and Lydia was finally experiencing the difference. "Anyway, yes, Malia is a work coyote. Tristan is a vampire, while Isaac, Erica, and Scott are werewolves. You on the other hand are a Banshee." Allison turned to Lydia and once again clarified, and this time Lydia wasn't as skeptical, though a little spooked, after Malia's little display. "So I'm like what? Someone that cries when someone dies?" she asked after taking a moment to get back a semblance of her composure. "That we don't really know. All we know for sure is that you can predict when someone will die and you end up drawing them or writing them out in cryptic words." Allison explained, to which Lydia nodded. Though a little overwhelmed, she was taking in everything with clear strides, perhaps due to Malia's proof. "You said I can predict when people die, not cause it?" she asked tentatively, to which Allison shook her head in a no. "So I'm not responsible for anyone I draw that ends up dying?" Her conscience cleared up a bunch at Allison's soft no, and that brought her to her next question. "So who killed them? Who killed Jackson?" Chapter 118, Chapter 114. So who killed them? Who killed Jackson? That question caused Allison to freeze up, as she was hoping that she wouldn't have to deal with explaining the complications of Jackson's death this early to Lydia. "Listen Lydia, it's a bit more complicated than what you probably think it is. She tried making sure that Lydia won't jump to conclusions after learning how Jackson died, but this was one of the things she hated that Malia didn't have her back on. Tristan killed Jackson. The response from Malia stunned Lydia while Allison's eyes widened scandalously, short of words at how tactless Malia was being. Allison looked at Lydia and saw the shock slowly receding a bit for Lydia to stutter out a simple question. Why? Allison wanted to take this chance to try and patch up the fractured atmosphere, but Malia held her shoulders and shook her head at her before focusing on Lydia, whose eyes were already turning red at its edges. Malia thought it would be better if she explained it to Lydia, but someone beat her to it at that moment. It's because I had to. At least it was the only way I could think of. They all turned around to see Tristan, still in his Lacrosse gear, walking into the lab they were in. All the people that died to animal attacks after Kate Argent's funeral were all Jackson's doing, though not directly. He was now close to them and standing beside Malia while Allison stood in the middle of them and Lydia. A kanima, that's what he was. A creature of the night that exists only to carry out his master's death vengeance. Master. Right now she was just going with the flow while her brain suppressed most of the shock she's been receiving. Yet, turns out Daler from Lacrosse was the one controlling him. Then why? Jackson's nature as a kanima is to serve as a killing weapon, and if I had killed only Matt, he would just have bonded with someone else and restart another killing spree. Tristan explained in an even tone as if what he was saying was common knowledge. Maybe there was a way to stop him from killing, but I have no idea what it is, so I settled for the only solution I had to stop him from killing more people. Thud. Her legs could no longer support her, so it guided her to the ground. Her tears fell down, but she didn't let out a sob and just stared blankly in Tristan's direction. Her subconscious wanted to deny what Tristan said as false, a lie he was telling. I have no reason to bother lying to you. The reason simply being that I have nothing to gain from you believing a lie or me being apprehensive of you trying to avenge him by killing me. Unfortunately, he's been finding himself speaking more and more these days, and while he didn't see it as anything bad, it also meant that he couldn't just leave it with him killing Jackson and walking away. Just watch her in case she tries doing something ridiculous. Tristan said and walked away, leaving the three girls in the lab, to the boys' locker room to switch out of his gear. Where did you disappear to? Boyd asked when he saw Tristan coming back to the locker room still in his training gear. Had to quickly take care of something. Tristan replied. Anything important? No, just some minor issue. He waved his hand in dismissal to show how unimportant the matter was. Boyd shrugged and forgot that topic. Anyway, are you free after school? Boyd asked. Tristan tapped his chin and thought of if he had any idle pleasure he could give up. Yeah, I'm not that busy after school. Anything? Yeah, I'm thinking of hitting the worker shop for supplies. Want to come along with? Since he already had something he could give up for time with Boyd, he agreed as they both walked out of the locker room. Where's Lydia? Tristan asked after he met Allison and Lydia in class. I took her to the infirmary to cool down and waited for her to fall asleep. Allison said while massaging her forehead. It just had to become complicated, hey. Welcome to our world. As Tristan and Boyd walked back from where Boyd went to get some supplies for a few repairs he was working on, they engaged in short conversations that flowed according to the pace they were comfortable with. Is something wrong with Lydia? Probably. Why? I don't know. Just thought it was a bit weird for her to spend the rest of the day on sick leave. Boyd didn't have much problem with Lydia. Hell, he didn't have problems with anyone, and being one of the few people he could talk to, it went without saying that he noticed Lydia's odd behavior. But unlike him, Tristan wasn't much concerned. Hope she can sleep it off. He said. Boyd regarded him with a raised brow. I mean, I can get Malia not getting along with Lydia, but do you have a reason why you are very dismissive of her? Tristan however shook his head and answered him. I'm not being dismissive, but rather just not being interested in her and her troubles. The same way I am with most people. His reply earned him Boyd's deadpan. In this context, that's the same thing. He said dryly. Tristan paused and reviewed his actions and attitude and how they probably were portrayed to Lydia. He didn't mean anything in particular concerning his lack of interest in associating with the girl. He didn't hate her or anything. He only started associating with other teenagers a few months ago and have only gotten close with Boyd and Allison, expecting him to be the same with everyone else like Lydia, McCall, Isaac, and his fellow teammates was a very high bar to cross. Maybe I'll warm up to her, who knows? He said, and that became the end of another discussion until either of them brought up a new one. They stopped before a red traffic light and waited for it to turn green along with the other pedestrians there. Can you boys help this old man cross? Someone called out to them from behind, which prompted them to turn around and see who was speaking to them. They saw a blind man that looked to be in his late 40s with a cane in his left hand. Oh, yeah sure. Boyd quickly said. Thank you. He said and extended his right hand forward, and Tristan, who was closer to it, held it. You don't have someone to help you walk around town? Tristan asked curiously as he led the man across the road after the light cleared. I do, but they are currently busy. I don't have a problem traversing the area since I'm familiar with it, but I need help crossing the lights every now and then. The blind man chuckled and thanked them once more before they left. Such good youngsters. With Gerard's burial just around the corner, the atmosphere in the Argents were strained, but Allison tried her best not to let it get to her. Her father ramped up her training by a few levels: survival, combating stronger opponents, wide array of weapons, instincts, rational decision-making in stressful situations. He made sure Allison started picking up her slack in all of them, while making sure not to overwhelm her that she couldn't master them to an acceptable level. Her weekends were spent training with her father, and even during weekdays her father could wake her up any time from 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. for a drill or to have her complete an assignment. While she sometimes complained about the intensity of the workload heaped on her, she never once said anything to her father about taking a break. She knew how much she needed this if she wanted to fight werewolves. As she was, she would die if she were to fight Malia or Tristan, much more quickly for the latter, which meant she had no chance against werewolves stronger than them, like the alphas. To be honest, the fight against werewolves was very unfair to them, as they were just normal humans, albeit with specialized training, but that didn't close the gap between them, only obscuring it and giving the hunters, dare she say, a false sense of security and confidence when facing werewolves. It's no surprise that more hunters die than werewolves. People like Gerard, her father, Kate, and her mother were very rare within the hunter circle. They were the elite of elites. The pinnacle of what a hunter could be, but meant nothing when faced against a werewolf if they lost their weapons. A beta would kill them with ease in such a scenario. Right now she was browsing the weapons gallery to see if she could get a recurve bow to use for practice, and weighing the options she picked out to check for their balance and grip. This one. She chose a black purple tipped bow after checking the texture and draw of the bow. An arrow? Not a weapon you usually see a girl with. An amused voice broke her from her own little world, and she identified a tall woman in tight leather pants and jacket. Oh sorry, I didn't mean to distract you. Mind if I ask you why a bow? Don't worry, it's nothing. Archery is just something I grew up with. It kinda runs in my family, and you can't blame a frail girl for picking up something that puts her away from a fight, right? Allison easily spun a lie, and with the other party being a woman made her a bit receptive that she even cracked a joke. A part of her mind entertained the thought of this being another of her father's tests, but she didn't think much of it. The tall woman with smoky lipstick laughed at her joke. Of course. But I don't think anyone will call you frail if you can use a bow like that. It doesn't exactly say frail or hobby, you know. Allison playfully winked at her while smiling. A girl gotta have secrets, right? What about you? Little me? I'm more of a hands-on type of gal. The woman said. Shopping for a new sandbag. Callie, let's go. Someone called her, which put an end to the two girls' talk. And that's my boyfriend. Name's Callie, by the way. She pointed at a bald jacked guy looking in their direction and introduced herself. Allison. Well, hope to see you around, Allison. And try not to scare the boys away with that. Callie said as she sauntered over to her boyfriend with a wave. Allison looked down on the bow in her hands and a chuckle left her mouth. I doubt bows will scare him all that much. She muttered to herself. Chapter 119, Chapter 115. The view from down here isn't so bad, Tristan thought as he laid back against the ground with Malia standing over him. Are you going to just gape from down there, or are you going to get up any time soon? We still have a bit over an hour and I need to work out some muscle kinks. She grabbed his hands and forcefully pulled him up to his feet before lowering herself to a fighting stance. Tristan grumbled under his breath but still held up his hands, which gained him a feral grin that would have ticked his fancy had it been any other time. After their morning run, which they hardly do nowadays since Tristan had gotten a lot faster after gulping down Peter's blood, much to Malia's annoyance as she could no longer keep up with him, they went back to combat training, something none of them liked. Well, in Malia's case, it was that she couldn't maul her opponents, which left her always feeling half full after sparring with anyone. At least that was how it used to be until Tristan's regeneration speed increased, once again thanks to Peter. Thud. Mind easing up a bit? Tristan groaned as he picked himself up off the ground. Why was he the one being thrown around? Given the fact that he had to lower his speed to match Malia's and also restricted from using his blood, some would think that he still had an undeniable edge over Malia, but they couldn't be more wrong. Unlike Tristan's cold-blooded nature, which was stealthy, precise, and aimed to kill from the go, Malia was more feral, and as someone who wholly accepted her bestial nature, it only made her stronger. And yes, that meant to evenly match Tristan on the same level. While Tristan was the most lethal one of the two, Malia was the more rabid one that you'd rather stay away from. Are you even putting your mind to it? Malia huffed while holding her ribs from the kick Tristan gave her. I'm literally holding back, Malia. How much more should I put my mind to it? Tristan sarcastically retorted. And with those words went away the thought of being a little too restricting on his abilities. She rushed at him and he received her first few blows with masterful parries and deflections. From an elbow strike to a leg sweep, Tristan tried his best to maintain his tempo of killing her momentum with every move she made, which meant he received more blows than he dealt. Malia relied mostly on her animal instincts when she fought, something Tristan knew very well, and she knew that Tristan focused on quick crippling blows with every opening he finds, a pair of polar opposites that perfectly balanced each other. And that was why Malia found herself falling to the ground after Tristan kicked the back of her knee to follow up with an elbow jab to the side of face. Can we just go? Tristan said with measured breaths before helping her up. Malia rolled her eyes. Time is not up yet. And don't think I didn't notice how your reaction spiked for a moment there. Tristan just smiled weakly and remained silent. That's 6-8 by the way. He reminded, but Malia didn't feel satisfied with that information despite her leading. For him to easily keep up with her despite him restricting himself that much showed just how stronger than her she was getting. Fine. 2 more wins to top it off and we'll stop. She said and started the next round. She did end up winning the last rounds and had to compensate Tristan with a longer drink, which left her feeling woozy for quite some time. She had to pay for bullying him the way she did, and Tristan only stopped when he knew she was about passing out. I'm bored. Malia whined. I've been saying that for months now, so try another one. Tristan commented blandly and Malia flipped him off. How do normal teenagers do it that they always look as if they don't have enough hours in a day? Probably because they know they might not do it later, or have the time for it when they grow older. It's the same with us, but I guess they have the edge since they try to plan out for their future. Tristan said absent-mindedly as he lay sprawled on the ground with Malia. So we don't have a future plan? She asked, somehow sounding shocked by it. No, Malia. We don't. Tristan said before adding. And no, I don't think selling guns is a plan that actually motivates us to enjoy our teenage years. Oh. Oh indeed. So why don't we have a future plan? We have to think of one so we won't be bored every time. I don't know if you are being absolutely clueless or actually serious, but I'll admit what you said has some merits to it. They then fell silent as they laid on the floor with only the ticking sound of the wall clock sounding in the room, creating a soothing mood in the living room. I'm hungry. Malia's words shattered the serenity they were just enjoying. Food or blood? Blood for now. She decided. Tristan moved his left arm over his head and it landed in Malia's open mouth, which would have painted a funny picture had anyone been here to see it. She took a small drink and released his hand after cleaning the blood trailing down it. That hit the spot. She moaned in satisfaction. I think today is Gerard's burial. Malia once again destroyed the tranquil peace. That doesn't concern us in any way, Malia. That's true. You haven't been training your blood control for some time now, why? I'm trying to figure something else out. Not that I'm having any progress. Guess that's what you get when you don't even know what you are trying to do in the first place. Another ability? She was a little bit surprised, as that would mean that Tristan had something else he could do other than blood control, twice better than werewolves and the like, which only came with the standard supernatural package. Can you turn into bats? You know, like Dracula. She pondered out loud. Tristan wanted to deny that, but he held himself back and only gave an unsure reply. Maybe. I have no idea, but it's still within the realms of possibilities. He still had no idea what he could and couldn't do. No one did, not even Satomi. Would have been better if there was someone you could ask other than the old nag. Malia's words rang true, and Tristan thought it would have been great if he had someone to talk to that knew about what type of vampire he was, or vampires in general. Anyone that is not an Argent, that is. Oh. He remembered something he had Derek talked about back then before they fought Peter. It was about Scott's veterinarian boss. Derek mentioned something about Scott's boss knowing a lot about the supernatural. We could talk to Derek and ask how trustworthy this guy is. Tristan revealed. A thought he would never have entertained on any other time, as he was actually thankful that only a handful of people outside his pack knew that he was a vampire, but boredom sometimes makes questionable decisions look reasonable. Malia eagerly agreed. Anything that would stave off how hollow she was currently feeling. What about Ms. Morrill? You did say she might know something about supernaturals. Malia added, but Tristan shook his head. Maybe one at a time. I'd rather not talk to someone about me being a vampire when I can't vouch for them not screwing us over. Malia nodded, accepting that thought, and threw it aside, and they set out for Derek. A duo of lazy teenagers driven away from the comfort of their cozy house by boredom, something that most people could relate to. Unsurprisingly, Derek was quite shocked that the two of them would take it upon themselves to find him when it didn't involve killing someone. Even more so when he heard why they came. Deaton? I don't know if he had knowledge of what you are looking for, but I can at least tell that he is not malicious in his dealings. Otherwise our dear Scott would have died without ever knowing how. Derek said. With their reason for coming here achieved and Tristan rejecting Isaac's invitation for a little bout, something he had noticed for the past week when he started teaming up with Scott to take him down during practice, they left for Deaton's vet clinic. Tristan's main reason for going there was to see if the man knew anything about vampires and the lore surrounding them, rather than learning how to see if he had another ability he could use other than blood control. Tring! Tring! The bell at the door's edge rang to signify the arrival of a customer, and someone they were familiar with greeted them, only to stop halfway after he realized who the new customers were. Is your boss around? Chapter 120, Chapter 116. Is your boss around? The question had to be repeated for it to dawn on him that these two weren't here for a pet checkup or even adopt one. They were here for a specific reason, and it involved his boss. Knowing the two of them, Scott had no assurance that they were here for anything civil. As far as he knew, the only time Tristan and Malia went out of their way to look for someone, it was usually because they wanted to kill them. Are you just going to stand there moping, or are you going to tell us if your boss is in or not? Sorry. Why are you looking for my boss? Do you have an appointment with him concerning a pet? Scott asked. Scott had gotten good with masking his emotions from other supernaturals. Tristan could see that, and so could his other half, but he could plainly smell the nervousness wafting off the skittish co-captain. Instead of overthinking and triggering a self-induced panic attack due to paranoia, why don't you just go call your boss, McCall? Malia cut off whatever he wanted to say. Having spent some time with Derek and the rest of the pack after their rescue, he finally was able to learn a lot about werewolves and stories of them Derek had to share, which also included the two teens in front of him. He wasn't that fearful of them anymore now that he was with Derek, but with what he heard about them, his wariness of them could help but grow. Though looking at them, I don't think they actually want to cause trouble. I can't smell any malicious intent from them either. He's out back doing some scheduled checkups and stitches. Wait here for a second, let me get him. Someone is looking for me. Alan Deaton came out and regarded the two teens with surprise and slight confusion. Don't worry, Scott. I'll take it from here. He said to his employee, who nodded and went about his task. So anything I can help the two of you with? He asked. In response, Tristan rolled up his sleeves to his shoulder to show a tattoo of 4 ovals stacked atop each other, the symbol of the Buddhist pack. Deaton looked at the two of them before opening the small fence at the counter to let them in. He led them to the room he used for treating the pets and closed the door behind them. So anything I can help the two of you with? He asked again. Vampires. What do you know about them? Tristan asked straightforwardly. Deaton smiled a bit while looking at the two of them before answering Tristan's question. Like everybody else, not much, I'm afraid. I suspected it, but never did I expect that Satomi-san had taken in one of nature's most mythical creatures. You know Grandma? Of course he knew Satomi knew Deaton, but he wanted to hear it from Deaton's mouth. The vet nodded. She's a senior to most of us who were lucky to know her. I also consider her a teacher when it comes to certain things. Deaton briefly explained while Tristan and Malia listened for any hint of a lie, one which they failed to find. That aside, did she send you my way? They both shook their heads while Malia summarized the events that led to them being here. That's understandable. I think. He said with a touch of amusement in his words, which the duo picked up but ignored. About the vampires, a taboo topic in some supernatural circles and most times than not a forgotten topic in some. One thing I know is that there is almost no written text in the present that contains information about the origin of vampires, the first progenitor. But even if there is no information on how vampires truly came to be, it is however a known fact that the vampire race consists of a lot of sub-branches, some so far removed that no longer bear a single vampiric trait or it has been deformed into something lesser. He stopped there to let them take that one in first, and as if sensing a story about to be told, Malia grabbed a chair and made herself comfortable, which made Deaton chuckle lightheartedly while Tristan couldn't be less bothered by her antics. Wait, I thought Dracula was the first vampire? Or is that just the movies and books? Malia questioned with genuine curiosity. That's a good question. Deaton acknowledged, took a moment to put his thoughts into words. The first written book about the vampire Dracula was in the late 19th century, and that book said that he gained his vampirism as a result of dabbling in dark magic in search of immortality, while the others that came after it said he was turned into one, some cursed, and everything in between. Then shouldn't the first iteration be closest to the truth? Tristan asked this time around, but Deaton shook his head. One thing very few people know, even among hunting families, is that the earliest recorded sighting of vampires dates back to the mid-1700s, around the same time as the emergence of werewolves. While I might not know about the origin of either of them, the origin of vampires had been a debate over the centuries, and the unanimously agreed upon consensus is that vampires didn't come after werewolves. Either during the same time period or longer before. Never after. He doubted anyone alive knew the true origin of the first vampire. The hunters, specifically the Argent family patriarch, was the only person he could think of that knew the origin of werewolves, but even they had little to nothing on vampires. So no origin history? Got it. Anything else you can tell me about the vampires that came after? Tristan asked. It was years ago when Deaton last looked into anything concerning vampires, so he had to think a bit to drag up anything he knew. Some people believe that the reason why the vampire line is branched out with different variant species is related to why nothing about the first vampire is known, as if his existence was erased on purpose, that not even his gender or things he did remained. Just like history had forgotten about him, so also is nature trying to forcefully wipe them out by further diminishing their bloodline with every vampire they sire. I'm sorry, but I really know little to nothing when it comes to vampires and their history in the supernatural world. Tristan waved his hand to dismiss Deaton's apology. Don't be. You've already helped me out a lot by the little you know. Deaton nodded and then added whatever he knew that wasn't related to vampire history. As you are a part of Satomi-san's pack, I'm sure you have an understanding of how nature in some way or another compensates for all its disasters. Always seeking balance. Tristan said. This was something Satomi had thought all of her betas. Nature has an obscure way of trying to make up for every destruction it causes, like bringing out more gold, diamonds, oil, soil fertility, etc. You're right. Part of why vampires and werewolves don't get along is because the one that came after started fighting the first one for the moon's blessing. And so, as a balance for giving them a natural enemy in werewolves and weakness in their fangs and claws, nature gave them an out that would enable them reach the heights of the first progenitor. Just like the way a beta can become an alpha, so also could a vampire now climb the evolutionary step, but that too came with a caveat: they will have to find out how to do it themselves. Malia was flabbergasted by what she was hearing. Why did nature sound like a petty bitch she knew? Just how many times must it try to fuck the vampires over? That's fucked up on so many levels. Were her expressed thoughts. They all agreed. So how come vampires are almost an extinct race at this point? Please don't tell me the green bitch won. Ha ha ha, no it didn't. You can also say it did depending on the side you are looking from. The middle-aged veterinarian stated. How so? Tristan queried, completely engrossed in the spotty vampiric history. They couldn't control their craving for blood and sank their fangs in everything they came across. You can imagine what followed after, right? A vampire hunt. Tristan said, but Deaton just smiled and corrected him. A vampire extermination. From the medieval hunters to supernatural creatures that prowled the day or the night, even humans joined in. Though they were all separated due to their differences, it didn't stop the entire supernatural world to hunt down any vampire they could. Well, damn. Malia subconsciously cursed. If they were left unchecked, then maybe humans and other races would no longer exist in the present day. They brought it upon themselves, in my opinion. So drunk on power that they acted without restraint and almost endangered the world due to their hunger. Even though they could multiply pretty quickly, the people they sired ended up turning against them. Backed against an existential crisis, they were picked off one by the other while the rest that remained vanished into hiding and preserved themselves and the line as much as they could. And that'd pretty much everything I know. He dusted his hands to show a gesture of being empty-handed. Thank you, Doc. I am truly grateful, so allow me to owe you one for this. Tristan said, and Malia stood up for them to take their leave. Then I guess I'll hold you to that. Care to hear a doctor's advice? They both nodded. Then don't bother looking into the history of vampires. Other than the fact that you'll find nothing, it's better to spend that time enjoying these few years of your youth, as it is the best time of your life. A very genuine advice from Deaton to the two teens standing before him. They both sported wry smiles, very small in Tristan's case, as they heard his word. That's the plan, Doc. Malia said, and they were about to leave, but Tristan stopped and turned to Deaton. Yeah. It's just that I was wondering about what you said about nature making vampires and werewolves share a few similarities. Yes, what of it? I always thought vampires were solitary in nature and kept mostly to themselves, but then they wouldn't have been able to fight off the werewolves of the time or create as much chaos as they did. Deaton nodded. True. Just like werewolves, vampires also moved in their own groups, a mini supernatural community if you will. Just like wolves had their pack and witches their coven, vampires had their clans. Chapter 121, Chapter 117. The loud sound of heavy impacts resounded throughout the loft of Derek's apartment as the half-moon light from the night sky passed through his skylight and shone on his sweaty figure as he fist slammed into the padded pillar in the middle of the room. Punch after punch, drop after drop, his mind went entirely into focus as he slammed into the padded pillar until everything came to a halting stop as the half-moon came into clear view after the clouds finally cleared. Huffing under his breath, Derek looked around and squinted his eyes as he looked around. Someone there? He called out, but his reply came as the silent room. Hello. With his instincts sharp and on alert, he surveyed the whole loft but still found no other presence than himself in the room. His eyes hardened at the unnatural silence and he went straight to the door and pushed it open, yet found nothing, at least until he turned to go back inside. His eyes further diluted as he saw the sigil painted on the surface of his door. A triskelion, but unlike the one painted on his back, all the lines on this one were straight, making it look like a triangle with its edge shooting off into three smaller coiling triangles. For Tristan and Malia, time slowly passed peacefully and not much had been happening, at least at the moment. Other than some heated glares which had been lacking intensity from Allison's dad anytime they crossed each other, they have been mostly unbothered by anything else. Their team won the regional cup, again, so that was something that made everyone super excited for a brief period of time before it started dying down. Unfortunately for Tristan though, that win came with the recognition, ergo popularity, which mostly resulted in a crowded table that he actively started dodging. At least that was after they finally took the subtle hint after Malia lost it and chased them all from crowding their table during lunchtime or any time in general. As for Lydia's continued friendship with them, considering Tristan did kill Jackson, it could only be attributed to her being understanding, which wasn't even saying enough. Though most of her coming to understanding the circumstances surrounding Jackson's death was thanks to Allison's efforts. Though she didn't speak as much to Tristan like she used to do, their relationship managed to remain as friends. At least both of them were mature enough to understand the plight of the other to some degree. That was good, all things considered. For the more annoying bit, after Malia's subtle hint for everyone to get lost, apparently only Scott and Stiles seemed not to get it. Scott mostly because these were the only supernaturals like him that he could associate with, and knowing from Derek and Deaton that they didn't just go around killing people helped calm his Stiles-induced apprehensiveness of them to acceptable levels. Stiles' reason for sticking with them on the hand was much more simpler, getting to know more about their side of the world and spending much time with Lydia. The result of the increasing friendship circle was Tristan spending less time in it. He was cool with everyone there, but what he wasn't cool with was engaging with everyone in it or being made to. You know that continuing staring at her isn't going to do anything but make you look creepy, right? Yeah. I'm sorry for not feeling too confident, you know. Boyd sharply retorted, sighing as he withdrew his gaze from Erica, who was currently working out for their PE. I think she might have the hots for you. Tristan stopped, looked at Erica, then at Boyd, then at Malia, saying nothing at all. Boyd effortlessly understood the unspoken words, but that didn't help his plight in any way. How do you guys even do it? Tristan asked back absent-mindedly as he loosely did his workout. Do what? Boyd's eyes were focused on a few certain people as he replied. Tristan. You guys, Isaac, Erica, Scott, Allison, even Lydia. It's like something changed in you guys overnight, and yet, Somehow, you guys just gravitate towards each other. He looked at his best friend questioningly. It's not a conspiracy, Boyd. Like-minded people flock to each other, or in this case, social butterflies. Tristan said, not even deigning to consider Boyd's words. Boyd didn't really believe that, thinking they knew each other in a circle outside school, but dropped it for something else. So, any tips for me in asking Erica out? Tristan stopped his workout, looking once again at Erica and Boyd, noting their key differences. Be confident. And sincere. Sincere. Boyd remarked doubtingly. Yeah, sincerity. Despite the whole Madonna thing she got going on, she's not a saint or anything like that, but she's kind of innocent, definitely not in the way you're thinking, at least when it comes to sincerity. Now it was Boyd's turn to odd, until something clicked, and then he looked weirdly at Tristan, but the pale not emoticon deftly added. No, it's not whatever you're thinking. I'm just highly observant, especially in figuring people out. It doesn't help that most teens, special or not, are open books if you just pay them the slightest attention. Tristan explained and walked towards a group of students who were getting ready for a run, leaving Boyd alone. Hey! You're still helping me, right? He called out, but Tristan was already on his run. Why are you being competitive all of a sudden? Malia asked as she looked at Allison, who was beside her and visibly putting the effort in what was supposed to be a casual run. Allison answered easily with orderly breath despite the exertion. Not competing, but comparing. No, not that. I'm observing the difference, yeah that. She said, having a bit of trouble putting her thoughts into clear words. Malia shrugged, not particularly caring either. It's an overwhelming difference, but for your observation, this is me basically doing nothing. She said. So, little to no effort? Allison asked. Malia laughed for a second and replied dryly, no hint of amusement in her voice. None. I'm actually trying not to run at normal speed. Trust me, this is not what you want a comparison of. Especially with a war creature. It was now Allison's turn to laugh, and she smartly gave up. She might have understood if Malia had said little effort, 5% maximum, not her saying she was pushing herself below her normal, basically working at negative percentages. Huff. Huff. Someone pushed through to them at that moment, 2 people actually, and joined in on their conversation. What's up, girls? Erica and Lydia caught up with them, and while Lydia was being casual and trying to exercise herself with her friends, Erica confronted Malia. Hey, snouts! How about testing baseline? She said patronizingly. Malia glared at her because of the ironic insulting nickname, but was more than glad to pick up the challenge. Who was Malia? No one challenged her, even in something she's not good at. Hey, Powerpuff Girls! Humans! Lydia called out, glancing at the people behind them, but Erica waved off her concerns. Don't worry, it's baseline. Nothing freaky. So, a normal race? At least your version of normal, I think. Lydia thought loudly to herself, but at that point Malia and Erica were gone, putting a sizable distance between them and the rest of the running students. They call that baseline? Allison asked with widening eyes at what was basically her full sprint at 120% for short distances, not the extended lap they were going. Beside her, Lydia looked at the two go and just sighed to herself, feeling a little envious of their capabilities, unlike her who essentially functioned as a random soon-to-be-dead countdown alarm. That's cheating on so many levels. She muttered. On the other side of the track, Erica was falling behind Malia, who still looked as if she wasn't even trying. Just give it up. There's no way you're beating me, definitely not in a race. She casually commented, but Erica snorted. Oh yeah? And what makes you think so? Maybe it would be different if we pushed ourselves, you'll never know. I would. You can't beat me like this, what makes you think you will if we get serious? At least catch up to Derek's speed if you want to beat me. That seemed to piss Erica off, as Malia basically said she had to compare to an alpha if she wanted to beat her. Okay, let's stop here before we push it past the world record. Malia said and considerately slowed down, practically to a walk, until the lap ended. She looked at Erica, who was walking with her and for the first time since knowing her, addressed her on neutral grounds. Hey, are you trying to push yourself? Not just on Tristan, but me and also possibly Derek? What is it that you want? She asked despite having a clue, and Erica's scrunched face at the question was all the answers she needed. You wouldn't understand. You didn't live it. She said bitingly. Malia, unfazed still, nodded. Of course I wouldn't. She said, and added. But stacking yourself against people too stronger than yourself will make your own progress seem negligible. Start from a small goal and then go higher from there. Erica looked skeptically at her, but asked. Like what? At her question, Malia's hands drew her sight to Scott, who arrived behind Tristan and Isaac. McCall. Yet. As far as I know, he's got some good instincts but his senses could use a little work. Malia said as she made her way inside to take a shower before meeting up with Tristan for a hopeful steamy session before classes. Oh, and stop pinning for Tristan or I'll gouge out your eyes. Chapter 122, Chapter 118. With the exams currently underway, everyone found themselves busy and had less time to hang out like they usually do. Even Derek's betas were invested in their studies as the threat of Gerard was no longer looming over their heads. For students like Allison, Lydia, Boyd, and surprisingly Isaac, exams were never a concern and the only thing they worked towards was keeping their grades consistent. Tristan and Malia were in the lower middle stages, with Malia failing more subjects than Tristan. The former, ever since their visit to the vet's clinic, had his mind split between two things. His normal life, which consisted of being a high schooler, friends and exams, and being a vampire. His control over his blood had gotten to a point that there was nothing else he could do to improve it. While they were pretty solid to an extent, they quickly became brittle as seconds ticked by if they weren't directly connected to his bloodstream. As for the other abilities his instincts thrummed with, he had no clue what they were or how to use them, so he left it for now. Satomi said it'll come in time, so he shelved it for whenever nature deemed it the right time. The exams quickly came and left, ushering the few weeks of reprieve, holidays, to the excited teens. For Tristan, this only meant more free hours in a day to laze around, and other than the frequent sex marathons with Malia, hunts every now and then, his days remained the same, until they came, that is. It had been in the middle of the night, but perhaps because of a vampire's intrinsic connection with the night, which was different from a werewolf's connection with the moon, Tristan couldn't fall asleep that night and ended up sitting on the roof. Due to her body pillow not sharing the same bed with her, Malia climbed the roof following Tristan with a blanket and fell asleep atop Tristan's body with the blanket over them. The longer the night went on, the longer Tristan started getting the feeling that something was up. It got to the point that his eyes inadvertently turned blue without his willing it, which ended up waking Malia as soon as she sensed the feeling of danger Tristan emitted for a brief second, a testament to her sharp senses even when comfortably asleep. "What's up, Trist?" she asked as the sleep completely bled out of her system upon seeing Tristan's flickering eyes. "I don't know, Malia, but..." His eyes were wide open and a bead of sweat fell down his face. Malia's eyes widened in shock as she felt the goosebumps all over his body as she touched him. She shook him and turned his head to face her from the he had been intently staring at. "Talk to me, Trist. You're scaring me." It was the first time she had seen him like this, so it rattled her a bit. Even more baffling was that despite what his body was showing, his emotions were the same. As if his body knew/felt something he didn't. "Something is wrong, Malia. Very, very wrong," he said before grabbing Malia and jumping down the roof. He and Malia took in sniffs of the surrounding air, but still they couldn't tell anything until they heard a very loud roaring howl. "That's Derek," Malia noted. Hearing Derek's howl made them certain that something was going on, and seconds later they heard Erica's. Malia was the first to react and moved in the direction of Erica's howl while Tristan lagged behind for a few seconds, remaining stationary as he felt like he was on the cusps of understanding what the night was trying to say, but soon gave up and followed after Malia after failing to understand anything. It was deep in the woods, and the closer they got, the colder the air was that brushed against his skin, turning his goosebumps rigid. However, when they got to the place Erica's howl came from, they failed to find anyone there, except a very visibly distraught Derek whose red eyes were staring at the slash marks on the bark of a tree. "Fuck!" he shouted and punched a hole through the tree and uprooted the whole thing and swung it to the side. Tristan, knowing something bad had happened, tried sniffing the air but quickly frowned as he noticed something weird. "Don't bother, you won't get their scent. They aren't your average wolves in any way," Derek said, stopping him from asking himself why he failed to get their scent. Turning to the raging alpha, Malia asked tentatively. "Seems like you have a clue of what went down, and you also mentioned wolves. Is there a new pack in town?" They watched as Derek went through different emotions, but the one that was most apparent was the simmering rage, and both teens keenly noted how wholly different he currently felt compared to before the incident with Gerard. A stark difference. "Derek? Is there a new pack or packs in town, and why would they kidnap Erica?" That's a blatant provocation. Tristan supplemented, prodding Derek for answers the Alpha clearly had. Pack. A single one, at least that I am aware of. Eventually Derek answered their questions after taking huge breaths to calm himself down. Seeing the Alpha calmed down, Tristan asked again. How big of a pack are we talking about? Up to 10 betas or more. Surprisingly Derek shook his head, saying something even more surprising. No betas. Alphas. Alphas? But you just said only one pack. Malia said frowning, but Derek nodded solemnly. Yes. One pack. One pack, no betas. Tristan asked just to make sure of what they were both hearing. Yes. If the pack doesn't have betas, then what does it have to be called a pack? Malia asked. Alphas. Derek replied. Right. A pack, but with alphas instead of betas. She asked again and Derek nodded, but that made her completely lose it. What the fuck is that? A pack of alphas? What the hell kind of shit is that? Derek sighed grimly, fully understanding how absurd the mere nothing of that might have sounded, but unfortunately he wasn't joking. He hardly ever joked. Even Tristan, the visual representation of being stoic, couldn't remain completely calm and stop his eyes from twitching upon hearing Derek's words, but he still managed to bring in the main focus. Wait, Derek. What would an alpha, a pack of them, want with Erica? He asked. Instead of answering, Derek's frown deepened and he asked a question in turn. What do you think? Just at that moment, Scott and Isaac arrived at their location and a quick look around painted someone's plain missing picture. Where's Erica, Derek? Isaac asked immediately, he and Scott not liking the atmosphere they arrived to. Derek roughly explained what had transpired and the cause of Erica's abductions, which left the two teenage newcomers shocked, speechless and slightly fearful. Maybe they kidnapped her to force you to join them, given the fact that you are an alpha just like them. Tristan suggested, but Derek's silence told how utterly unamused he was by that thought. How about we table the discussion of the Alpha Pack to another time and find a way to get Erica back instead? Isaac's anxious words portrayed just how worried he was for Erica. Knowing what they both went through the last time they were abducted when someone wanted to get to Derek, the traumatic memories started creeping back and he instantly shivered, scared witless for Erica. Scott held his shoulder in comfort as the atmosphere came down colder, as everyone knew exactly what had Isaac so terrified. Seeing his own beta relapsing back into healing traumas, Derek's eyes got even colder, but Tristan said something before he could make a heated decision. Do you know how many alphas are in the pack? He directed at the sole alpha in their midst. From what I've heard, either 5 or 6, including their alpha. Derek answered. Tristan exhaled with a hard expression on his face and squared a look at Derek, who squarely returned it until he relented. That's a lot of alphas, not mentioning what kind of monster they'd have leading them as an alpha. An alpha of alphas. It doesn't look good anyhow you flip it. That was obvious from the get-go, but how does that help us get Erica back? Isaac asked. He obviously didn't get the implications of it, and Tristan simply refrained from clarifying how frightening the reality of that was for them and everyone else. This is too serious for us not to tell our alpha if we are to get involved or get dragged into it. As for Erica, either we wait or try finding her. Either way, it's clear we are being dragged into a likely trap, or at least Derek is. Malia interjected at that point. And both ways lead to a confrontation with a pack of alphas, not just a loose group of them. A pack of them. Best case scenario for everyone is if they can be reasoned with, unless we will find ourselves plunging down a steep slope. Derek, how long have you known about the Alphas pack arriving in Beacon Hills? Tristan asked. A few weeks. Derek said truthfully. And apart from painting my door in their symbol as Provocation, they've done nothing so far despite me trying to find them all this while. Not just Tristan, but Malia and the others frowned as they heard Derek's words. A pack of bona fide alphas had been in Beacon Hills for a few weeks and yet no one knew. Tristan looked up at the night sky, a fleeting thought crossing his mind, making him wonder what the night was trying to tell him. Chapter 123, Chapter 119. Unfortunately for Tristan, Satomi chose the worst time to be away from the country, right when a pack of alphas decided to take residence in Beacon Hills. According to Elias, she was out visiting some old supernatural communities, which meant she could be anywhere from the neighboring countries to another continent entirely. As long as she got Elias' message, she could be back in the next few days or in a week's time, so all Tristan and Malia could do was wait, especially when Elias couldn't tell them anything and told them to wait for Satomi's return. When Tristan had told him what he had felt moments before they heard Derek's howl, the elderly man could only loosely attribute it to the same thing an animal felt in the event of a natural disaster, but given that no one else felt it, or as acutely as Tristan did, he theorized that it could be something else but closely related. That was all he could say given how little anyone knew about vampires. Thinking it's a bad time for Allison to be gone on holidays, Malia had asked after their visit to Elias, and Tristan had nodded. Given how close they were in Allison's hunter lineage, he would have asked to see if she could dig up something from their archives. Unfortunately, she and her mother were gone for the holidays and would be back in possibly a week's time. And Tristan had no reason for going up to Chris Argent and seeing if he knew anything. They might have been cool with each other a while ago, but all that changed after that day at the underground bunker. Since there was nothing they could do until Satomi came back, and with Derek and his remaining pack members focused on finding Erica, Malia and Tristan took the day off, with the former dragging the latter to the clothing store to get some new clothes. The last they came was at the beginning of the year, and right now it is currently the last week of June. Due time for a wardrobe update, at least according to Malia. Just like always, she went ahead picking up clothes for him, requiring little to none of his input, while he just relaxed and let her have her fun. As they had literal boxes of clothes they've only worn once or never at all, Malia settled for picking only a few articles of plain-colored clothes that Tristan very much preferred to the more fashionable ones. To him, true fashion was quality and simplicity. The same with Malia, but she preferred a dash or couple dashes of fashion to them. Not to Lydia's level, but definitely above Allison's. They spent approximately 45 minutes there, where Malia spent 90% of the time going through options than actually buying them. You've been spacing out a lot recently. Is whatever you felt that night still getting to you? Malia asked her mate when she met his vacant eyes after checking out. Tristan shook his head and stood up to take one of the bags from her. Not that. Oh. So you're just retreating back into your thoughts to swim in them? That's something you don't do nowadays. 2 words from Tristan and she immediately knew what he was doing. Why don't we eat out today instead of just going back? Allison once showed me this place with great gelato ice cream. She suggested and happily drove them towards the location despite him not answering. The place was cozy enough and had few people inside, Tristan's type of atmosphere. The snacks and ice cream they made were great, especially the ice cream, and it became even better when Malia discreetly mixed in a whole handful of her blood in Tristan's portion, making it one of the greatest desserts the vampire has ever tasted. Half an hour passed, spent resting and slowly relishing the tasty gelato ice cream, and they were ready to leave. Making their way to their car, their attention was drawn to revving of 2 loud motorcycles, the type that Tristan very much hated, parked a few spots from their car. The cause of the revving noise were 2 boys, identical twins based on their looks and matching body stature. The twins, dressed in matching black leather, looking to be in their late teens or early 20s, looked up at them and instead of keeping the loud sounds down, smirked and fired it up even more before driving away while laughing. 50% off bastards. Malia cursed and flipped a finger in the direction they drove in. Come on, let's go. Tristan said nothing and just silently entered the car and rested his head backwards. Why do you think the Alpha Pack wants Derek into their pack? I doubt they are recruiting just for the sake of it. He suddenly asked, taking Malia, who was driving, by surprise. How would I know? Instead of that, you should be asking why their Alpha suddenly decided to recruit Alphas into his pack instead of siring Betas. He must have had them at some point, right? As far as she was concerned, nothing made sense when the topic revolved around the Alpha Pack and their Alpha. I guess we'll never know. The grinding sound of something heavy being moved echoed loudly in the quiet space that it swallowed any other sounds being emitted. The grinding came to a loud stop as it pushed fully open by a huge figure with a heavy muscular frame. The source of the grinding, a multiple inches thick vault of an old bank, and inside the vault were female figures cuddled in a corner. What do you want from us? We never did anything to you. Erica's familiar voice shouted as she saw a group of 5 figures, but she quickly quieted down as one of them, the woman in the group, glared at her into submission with her red eyes. The man leading the group of alphas chuckled weakly as he took a step into the vault, making the 2 girls cuddle into each other in apparent fear. Haha. What do I want from you indeed? Unfortunately, it is not I who wants something from you per se, but your alpha who does. At least he will come to with a little persuasion from me. Please, we didn't do anything. Erica choked out between terrified sobs, her current disheveled and frightened face drawing no pity to her. Hearing her, the man, the pack's alpha, walked closer to her while also drawing a peculiar observation to Erica and the other girls' eyes as they finally saw him fully. An elderly well-built man in his early 50s with short neatly trimmed dark blonde hair, a picture-perfect older gentleman, with a retractable walking stick in his left hand to aid his apparent blindness. Lion, the alpha of alphas. Oh my dear, of course you did nothing because there is nothing you can do. A beta's purpose is elevating their alpha to a higher height and it is the alpha's job to make them fulfill that purpose, so rest assured as there is nothing you need to do. He spoke slowly and eloquently that every syllable he said were clearly heard as he directed his gaze from Erica to the girl beside her. Worry not. Derek Hale will come around. He has no choice but to. Were his last words before walking out of the vault before it was pushed closed by the physically biggest alpha amongst the group. Won't it be better to just kill them? Or are we really waiting for Derek to find and rescue them? The alpha who closed the vault, Ennis, asked. Ennis is right, Lion. Killing one will serve as motivation and enough persuasion to start weighing his choices, said Callie, the sole woman of the group. Both were the same couple that met Allison when she was testing out a bow. Lion smiled faintly while waving his fingers in a disapproving fashion. Not yet. For now we react to how he acts. His next action will tell us everything we need to know about him as an alpha. And besides, he isn't the main reason we came back here, especially after Gerard's death. We met the other one when we went out. One of the youngest duo in the pack, one of the twins Tristan and Malia saw earlier in the day, spoke. All I can tell is that he felt weird. Definitely not a werewolf. Lion didn't say anything in reply to that but gave a little warning instead. We'll leave Satomi's little leech for now until we get the other one. Once we do, even someone as astute as Satomi will have to make her choice. Though I hope it never comes to that. People like me and Satomi, we are very rare. And I would hate to reduce that number even more. Chapter 124, Chapter 120. Tristan was silently thankful that Satomi came back a few days later after Elias had informed her of a pack of alphas currently in Beacon Hills. He had expected it to a certain degree but seeing how serious Satomi looked upon hearing about it had him painting what he already knew and conjectured in darker shades. If it escalated into a full-blown fight that forcefully dragged them into the chaotic fray, Tristan was unsure of how it would come out. Sure they had an overwhelming number advantage but the other side had 4 alphas and one who was strong enough to suppress 4 alphas under him. The very thought of it made him apprehensive, making him hope it was just his mind overreacting. Tristan had no clear idea of the difference between alphas and no, his fight with Peter didn't count as a basis for a qualitative analysis on alphas. Even killing Peter took the combined effort of him, Derek and Malia to put down, a trio that were clearly above the average beta in strength, speed, and killing efficiency and yet they still struggled against Peter. It's not as if everyone in their pack were master fighters or even good at it. So yes, it genuinely worried him especially after seeing Satomi's apprehension. All she had told Tristan along with the others was the pack's alpha, Lion, who became vengeful after Gerard killed his pack in an ambush when he had come for a peace treaty. Apparently, all this happened during the time of the Hale pack back then and there was a lot of tension back then after a hunter had unjustifiably killed an alpha's beta, the situation further devolving until 2 packs were wiped out and those alphas chose to follow Lion than Talia Hale. So not only were they stronger, older, and more experienced alphas, they might or might not have a bone to pick with the Argents. Honestly, the Argents have been nothing but trouble. Tristan gave his heartfelt unbiased opinion of the resident hunting family. Satomi smiled wryly, not outright denying his words. The progression of time brings out different types of people, both good and bad. The current Argent Patriarch and his daughter are good examples. She pointed out. Just because Gerard and his daughter were unprincipled in their actions which had resulted in a long line of deaths which eventually led to theirs doesn't mean that the Argents as a whole were bad. The father is constantly ensuring he doesn't breach the code, while the daughter is passionate and moral. The greatest quality even you would want your enemy to have. She said but Tristan just mumbled some incoherent words under his breath that she failed to catch. The Argents constantly messing things up aside, what are we to do if we come across this alpha pack? Brett asked, leaning against a wall while munching on a plate of cereals. For now, we react. We don't know what brought Lion back to Beacon Hills and while he seems to have business with Derek Hale, we are currently unaware why. I owe a debt to Talia so I will extend a helping hand if he ever needs it, as long as it doesn't endanger you all. Having Lion as an adversary is a worrying concept. Elias nodded to Satomi's words. He's a natural leader, having the capabilities and strength of one to greater degrees. His plans are the main thing we need to look out for. The older man complimented. All this talk for just one man, and we know next to nothing about his pack and the alphas in it. Were Tristan's thoughts after Satomi's recap on past events and further advice of caution when coming across the alpha pack. It wasn't a great starting point, but then again, who else had recruited alphas into his pack instead of betas? Even after everything, nothing concrete was known concerning the current Decalion. I can't believe this. Tristan got tired after listening to a 2-hour-long narration of past events and need for caution, yet no one knew anything about the pack. Seriously, man, at this point I really want to bundle up the both of you and bring you out of Beacon Hills to Devonford. Brett said as he came beside Tristan, who was scrolling through his phone. He seriously thinks that in the whole of Beacon Country, Beacon Hills in particular was cursed. It is not as if there were no other alphas in Beacon County, they were in considerable numbers, but their territories or their part of town in general doesn't become a genocidal spot every 2 weeks. Tristan sighed, looking downcast while sending out the text he had typed. Tell me about it. It's been months after months since I started that damned school. Brett laughed, drawing a few eyes to them before they left them to themselves. It's funny every time I see you cursing more and more with every passing day. And what do you think is to blame? Tristan grumbled as his phone vibrated as he received a text. Brett stretched his neck to see who Tristan was texting and hummed in surprise as he saw the recipient of the string of texts being exchanged. Never knew you talked this much with the Argent girl, Allison, was it? Yeah, Allison. I don't. Sometimes talking to her or just listening to her talk helps me pass time. Tristan said while typing out his reply and sending it. Yeesh, at least don't let her know that. Brett said with a fake wince, but Tristan just ignored his playful antics. She's coming in 2 days. That's good news, if any at all. Tristan offhandedly commented, which Brett clearly caught and teased while wrapping a hand over Tristan's shoulders. Is that longing I hear in your voice, Trist? You miss her this much, hey? Tristan exhaled loudly, exasperation and tiredness evident in his breath. I want to see if her dad knows anything about Decalion or his pack. Nothing more, nothing less. Gah. Damn man, you're heartless. And here I thought you were an empathy. Brett could only give up and leave Tristan to himself, thinking somewhere in the back of his mind that maybe Tristan was hiding it, but shook his head and dropped it after remembering who Mr. Lack of Social Cues was. Getting himself a cup of freshly dripped blood, he took small sips from it and idly chatted with Allison while wondering about the connection of what he felt that night and the arrival of the Alpha Pack. It's been a few days and they still have yet to find Erica or the Alphas. Those Alphas must be great at masking or diffusing their scents, given that I couldn't even tell what I was smelling. He had a lot to ponder on, but as he was getting nowhere regardless of how long he thought on it, he delegated to do it another day and spent the night at Elias' place instead of returning home. And the result of that decision, though he realized too late, was that he couldn't have sex within the walls of a house full of werewolves, mostly hormonal teenage wolves. The full moon is a day or 2 away. Isaac won't have any semblance of control due to his present state of mind, so Derek will have his hands full. Hopefully Erica has the same help Isaac will be getting since she's being held by a group of alphas. Tristan thought idly as his naked body hugged Malia's under the blanket and cold wines, closing his eyes to a good night's sleep. Allison Argent POV. Allison turned around on her bed, lying sprawled out, as she spoke with someone over the phone while watching the full moon. Well, I talked with Malia and Tristan a few days ago and apparently none of them bothered with telling me that Erica has been kidnapped by a bunch of big bad group of alphas. Pack of alphas. Oh, sorry for interrupting you, Allison, and also for using the wrong slang. Does cult or confraternity sound better? Lydia's voice came in sharp sarcastic hysteria, which brought out a laughing fit in Allison. Stop being dramatic, Lydia. It happened a few days ago and I wouldn't have known if I hadn't asked either. Anyway, it seems things are about to become hectic again in Beacon Hills. Allison said softly, slowly losing herself in the resplendent rays of the moon. Yeah, and people will start dying, right? Lydia said in a tiny voice. Lydia. I can feel it, something, it's at the tip of my tongue but I can't seem to say it out loud. Do you think Erica is going to die? Lydia asked in an uncharacteristically low quivering voice. Allison sympathized with Lydia's plight, a lot more than people thought she did. I really hope not, Lydia. I really hope not. She heard Lydia's despondent chuckle followed by a string of wistful words she strongly resonated with. You know, I never thought this was how my high school life will turn out to be, least of all me turning out to be a creature from horror story times, a banshee of all things. Right? And I'm being trained to kill people, supernatural people with powers, who abuse their strength and kill defenseless humans. A hunter or whatever you call it, I'm being groomed to be the next best killer in my family. This was nowhere in the list of things I considered when starting high school. Allison said with a laugh at the end as if she just heard a joke's ironic punchline. I mean, tell me about it. What bullshit even is this in the first place? Lydia asked, and they both laughed for some time before stopping for Lydia to continue. What did you plan on not doing in high school? First was trying to make lasting friends in case we ended up moving again. I also decided against falling in love or having a romantic relationship for the same reasons. That and maybe a few others, I don't know. They seem so foreign now that I think about it. Allison said. Yeah. Lydia agreed, and started. But it's also funny how you failed all of them. Allison thought of it but slowly shook her head. Nah, I think I managed some. I mean, I haven't gotten a boyfriend or gotten into any relationships yet. True, but you currently have feelings for someone, right? Lydia questioned with a knowing tone. Hey, wait, what? Allison was flabbergasted. I'm proud and self-centered, Allison, not dumb. Yeah, thought so. I won't be saying anything in regards to that, so relax you pointy tits, princess. That also means no wishing you luck or telling you to give up, non. Allison was speechless that she had a hard time forming coherent words, but she managed. Isn't that a bit heartless? You tell me, you're the princess here, aren't you? Chapter 125, Chapter 121. The full moon came and passed without much fanfare, unless for those who had to be extra careful with their emotions throughout the day. Emotions were abstract concepts humans embodied, and so it was factually impossible to have complete hold over one's emotions. Not allowing emotional outbursts to affect your clear mind, on the other hand, was very possible and easy with consistent practice, which was what werewolves learned in order to safely tide over a full moon. In regards to the full moon concerning Malia, she easily brushed off the violent impulses, having had great success in the practice over the years, as Tristan was always at her side through each and every one of them. The only time she'd ever lose control during the full moon is if she was triggered, which was something all werewolves, or were coyote in her case, became easily susceptible to, even alphas. So it all came back down to how good your control was. Are you going somewhere? Tristan asked curiously after seeing Malia coming out of the bath, so early in the morning at 8:30, and was getting dressed. Malia nodded, and while sifting through clothing articles on her drawers. Yeah, she came back last night, remember? Tristan let out a silent awe as he remembered that little bit the last time they talked a few days back. Right, that happened. Are you girls going out, or are you just going to her house? Malia grinned as she picked out the perfect combo and laid them on the bed before losing the towel covering her body to apply a light lotion before putting on her clothes, while Tristan silently watched on. Ha! I don't think her mom has warmed up to me that much to be cool with me coming over, so we're hanging out in Lydia's house instead. She answered and showed Tristan her short jean shorts, camo tops, a large jean jacket over it, and a beret hat to top it off, all atop high-length boots. Tristan nodded at the end product. Great. Malia nodded in satisfaction and walked over to give him a series of deep kisses before finally leaving after Tristan got a fill from drinking her blood. Staying any later after that would have cancelled her day out by at least a few hours, if not the whole day. With Malia gone, Tristan pushed himself off the bed and got to work. First, cleaning the house, prepping lunch or dinner before finally separating himself from the chores. He trained a bit in the woods near his house, making sure his blood control didn't drop until it became second nature to him. The only weapon he had apart from his blood control was his venom, which felt as if it was heightened a few notches after drinking Jackson's blood before ripping out his heart. With that done, he rounded it up and turned to leave to take a shower, but something caught his attention. A crow. They both stared at each other in some sort of transfixed state that every slight tilt of Tristan's head was perfectly mirrored by the crow. The same thing happened to Tristan with every slight movement the crow made. They were both aware of their actions, at least Tristan was, but what made him so drawn in was not knowing if he was the one copying the crow's movements or it was the crow copying his, or both of them doing and matching similar actions without pause or slight lag. Wanting to test it out, Tristan slowly raised his hand towards the crow, which it once again perfectly raised its own wing at the same time. Tristan had wanted to see if he could command the crow's actions, but before he had the chance, the forest trees ruffled and drove flocks of birds into the air, which startled Tristan and the crow out of their trance as the former watched as it flew away to join the moving flock. That was weird, nothing else said. Tristan mumbled, keeping the experience aside to ponder on later, knowing thinking too deeply on it now will bring nothing. Tristan tried looking for Erica in his spare time, but his yields were the same as Derek and his pack's ardent search for Erica, nothing. He wasn't too worried because he knew they'd find her sooner or later, the problem would be if they arrived a bit too late. Between Stiles, Stilinski, McCall, Isaac, and Derek, it would be an unbelievable story if they failed to find her. His brain dance was cut short as the attention-grabbing call ringtone from his phone sang out, which he deftly answered after seeing the caller. "Kinda busy right now. Anything I can help you with in between?" he said without even giving the caller the chance to get a word in. "I highly doubt that." "Busy doing what?" Boyd's highly skeptical voice came through. Tristan held down the highly irritated sigh that wanted to run up his throat and instead gave a stressingly terse reply. "Busy doing something." Boyd apparently had little to no strength to argue today and quickly gave up. "It's nothing much, but I've been talking to Erica for a while now until she just went off the grid. None of her lines are going through. Do you know what's up?" Tristan was perplexed and confused at the same time, not understanding where his presence came in the middle of all that. "And?" Boyd's heavy long sigh bled through the speakers, a result of being completely fed up, which usually happens when someone, him, talks to Tristan on his worst days. "I figured since you guys have some sort of after-school circle which I'm not a part of, and I ain't sayin' none about that, so I thought it's better to call you to find out what's up than calling Isaac or Allison. I'm kinda worried, man." With how concerned Boyd sounded through the phone, Tristan reckoned that they had been talking for quite some time now, probably before or during the exams, which he had absolutely no idea about. Or at least he would have been content with remaining blissfully ignorant if only Boyd could have just chosen to call anyone else besides him. "Tristan. I have no idea where she might be or how she's currently doing. Maybe you could try asking Isaac since they're basically best friends or something like that, I don't know." Tristan spoke truthfully in a way that was easily understood and just as easily for Boyd to misinterpret. "Really? You seriously got no idea whatsoever?" Boyd asked again, yet Tristan's answers were the same. "Okay, cool. Catch you later." "Please don't. Do that when school resumes," Tristan said before cutting the call. Derek Hale POV. "I've been trying for days on end but I still got nothing yet. I think my spleen might be made up from Adderall at this point," Stiles said and whined consistently, much to Derek's annoyance. Derek has never been pissed off at any point in his life than at this point right now. The direct cause of it was because this was the second time his betas were targeted in a bid to coerce his submission. Derek was utterly furious and Stiles seemed to be the only person not being able to understand his mood with the sarcastic and humorous comments he'd drop every now and then. "Isaac." He turned his focus to Isaac, who the boy just shook his head slowly with a hardened expression on his face. "Have you guys checked the old railway?" Stiles asked, but Derek shook his head, not understanding why they needed to check there. "I used to live there. Any reasons why we should bother checking it?" Derek then asked, to which Stiles slapped his head in exasperation. Stiles then slowly and tentatively explained. "Even if it's not a choice any of you want to take, the chances of us finding Erica is higher if we find the Alpha Pack instead. It's way easier to look for a group than a single person," he pointedly hammered out. They all understood his point, Derek included, but he didn't get where the old railway came in. "And the railway is an underground shortcut to different parts of Beacon Hills. We might be able to find Erica if we look at the places connected to the railway and filter it down till we find anywhere that looks like it could be used as a holding cell for Erica," Stiles expanded further. "But that's easily tens of locations we have to check out," Isaac pointed out, but Stiles' cocked brow and sarcastic reply left him quiet. "Yeah, so what? You got anything else important planned out, or a plausible suggestion perhaps?" "Yeah, thought so." Even if he hated Stiles on more occasions than he could count, Derek could admit that the boy was scarily smart, more so than any teen his age, which also included Tristan and Lydia. "We don't have a choice except checking those places, and if Stiles is right, we might end up finding Erica," Derek said to Scott and Isaac, only to have Stiles smoothly cut in at that point. "Or run into a pack of alphas. That's like a 50% odd just waiting to happen." "Stiles, we get it," Derek said and patted the boy on his shoulder comfortingly for how good a job he had been doing. "Try and get some rest, okay?" Yeah, That sounds like a good idea.
Thanks for listening.